My phone had gone quiet after the initial flurry of texts from Emily and Mother. The silence felt ominous, like the pause before something breaks. I kept glancing at the screen, waiting for the next explosion. It came at midnight in the form of pounding on my door. Max started barking before I'd even processed the sound. I looked through the peephole and saw Emily barely recognizable. Her hair was wild mascara streaked down her face in dark rivers, still wearing what looked like pajama pants and an oversized sweatshirt. She pounded again harder, and I heard her voice through the door, raw and desperate. "Maggie, please, I know you're in there. Please, I need to talk to you." Every instinct told me not to open that door. Nothing good had ever come from letting Emily into my space, into my peace. But something in her voice stopped me from walking away. It wasn't the manipulative sweetness I'd heard on the phone earlier. It wasn't the performative distress she'd used so effectively our whole lives. This was something I'd never heard from her before. Actual crisis. The sound of someone coming apart at the seams. I opened the door. She practically fell into my apartment, stumbling past me to collapse on my couch. Up close, she looked worse than I'd thought. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were red and swollen, not from recent crying, but from hours of it. This wasn't an act. This was a genuine breakdown. "What do you want, Emily?" I kept my voice flat guarded. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapped her arms around them, and for a moment looked exactly like Sophie had looked sitting on the porch steps. Young, scared, lost. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice breaking. "I should have told you 20 years ago. I should have told you the day I found out." I stayed standing, arms crossed, keeping distance between us. "I'm listening." She took a shuddering breath. "I know I'm not their real daughter. I've known since I was 12 years old." The words didn't make sense at first. I stood there processing them, trying to understand what she was saying. What? The DNA test, the hospital records, the switched at birth truth. "I know, Maggie. I've always known." She looked up at me with eyes that held so much pain I almost didn't recognize her. "I found the papers when I was 12. I was looking for my birth certificate for a school field trip, and I found the DNA results in Dad's desk instead." I sat down slowly in the chair across from her, my legs suddenly unreliable. "You knew." "I saw it in black and white. No biological relation to either parent." I didn't understand at first, thought maybe there was a mistake, but there were hospital investigation reports, everything. I took the papers to Mom, crying, asking her what it meant. Emily's voice went hollow. She panicked. I'd never seen her like that. She grabbed me, made me promise never to tell anyone, never to speak about it, never to even think about it. She said if anyone found out, they'd take me away, that the authorities would put me in foster care, that I'd lose everything, lose them. Jesus, Emily. I couldn't help it. I imagined her at 12, Sophie's age, finding out the foundation of her entire existence was a lie. She told me they chose to keep me, that they loved me, but if I told anyone, if I spoke about it, I'd destroy the family and end up alone. I was 12, Maggie. I was terrified. She started crying again, huge, gasping sobs. From that day on, every single day, I lived in fear that they'd change their minds, that they'd realize I wasn't really theirs and send me away. Every tantrum I threw, every demand I made, it was a test. Do you still love me? Will you keep me? Am I still your daughter, even though I'm not your daughter? I felt something crack open in my chest, a complicated mix of horror and sympathy and rage. So you watched them treat me like garbage to feel secure. Every time they chose me over you, every time they gave me something and ignored you, I felt safe. I felt real. She looked at me with devastation written across her face. I didn't hate you, I swear I didn't. I was just so scared that if they loved you too much, they'd remember I wasn't theirs. That you were the real daughter, and I was the mistake they were stuck with. I was their real daughter, I said, my voice shaking. And they made me invisible because you needed constant proof they wouldn't abandon you. I was 12 when it started. A terrified kid who thought she'd be thrown away if she wasn't perfect, if she wasn't the center of everything. Her voice rose, desperate for me to understand. And then it became normal, the way things were. I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to tell you. It had been going on for so long that admitting it would mean admitting I'd been complicit in hurting you for years and years. We sat in silence. Max, sensing the tension, came and put his head on my knee. I stroked his fur mechanically, trying to process what I was hearing. You had 26 years to tell me, I finally said. 26 years after you were old enough to understand what was happening, to understand that your fear didn't justify destroying me. I know. Her voice was barely a whisper. I know. I'm a coward, just like Dad. I watched him stay silent my whole life, watched him let Mom make all the decisions, never standing up for anything or anyone. And I became exactly like him. Too scared to speak the truth, too weak to do the right thing. She buried her face in her hands. When you left, I was relieved, because if you weren't there, I didn't have to see what we were doing to you. I didn't have to face it. And then you came back with this beautiful life you'd built, and I hated you for it. Hated that you'd survived without us, without their approval, because if you could do that, it meant everything I'd done to feel secure was pointless. You were stronger than all of us. I looked at my sister, this woman I'd spent my whole life resenting, and saw something I'd never seen before. Not a villain. A victim who'd made victims of others to survive her own fear. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained it in a way that was somehow worse than simple cruelty or greed. She didn't betray me for greed. She did it for survival, and somehow that hurt more. Emily left my apartment around 2 a.m, hollow-eyed and exhausted from crying. I watched her drive away and knew I'd just witnessed something irreversible. You can't unknow certain truths. You can't hear someone confess to a lifetime of fear-driven cruelty and pretend the world is still the same shape it was before. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the sister I'd hated with the terrified 12-year-old who'd been told she'd lose everything if she spoke the truth. Over the next week, I heard nothing from Emily directly, but Sophie texted me 3 times. Brief messages. Mom hasn't left her room in 2 days. Then, Grandma is here all the time now? It's loud. And finally, can I come visit you and Max? I told her she could come any time, but I didn't push. Whatever was happening in that house, Sophie needed to navigate it at her own pace. I focused on my work, met with clients, and tried not to think about the fact that my lawsuit against my mother was moving forward while my sister was apparently falling apart 3 blocks away. David called me on a Thursday afternoon, his voice tight with stress. I don't know if Emily told you, but she's not doing well. I'm in Sacramento for work, won't be back for another week. Your mother is trying to take over, and Sophie is caught in the middle of all of it. What do you mean not doing well? She won't get out of bed, won't eat unless someone forces her. She just lies there staring at the wall. I think telling you the truth broke something in her. He paused. I can't leave this job. We need the income, but someone needs to be there for Sophie, and your mother isn't the answer. He hung up before I could respond, and I sat there wondering how I'd become the emergency contact for a family that had spent decades making sure I knew I didn't belong. The call I'd been half expecting came 3 days later. Emily's voice on the phone so quiet I almost couldn't hear her. Maggie. Can Sophie stay with you just for a while? I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands suddenly unsteady. What's going on, Emily? I can't take care of her right now. I can't take care of myself. Mom keeps trying to manage everything, telling Sophie what to do, and Sophie just looks more and more miserable. Her voice cracked. I'm not safe. My heart stopped. What do you mean you're not safe? Emily, are you thinking about hurting yourself? No, I won't hurt her. But I can't trust myself to be what she needs right now. I look at her, and I see everything I've destroyed. I see you at her age and I can't breathe." She started crying. "Please, she asked for you. She said you're the only one who doesn't lie to her, and Mom lost her mind, but Sophie's right. You're the only stable person in this disaster. Please take her." I closed my eyes thinking about Sophie's texts, about that girl watching her family implode, and having nowhere safe to land. "I'll come get her this afternoon." Emily met me at the door when I arrived at the villa. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the 2 weeks since the Harrisons' visit. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes red and empty. My mother was in the living room, arms crossed, radiating fury. "This is absurd," Mother said the moment she saw me. "Sophie belongs with her family, with people who actually care about her." "Sophie belongs wherever she feels safe," I said evenly. "And apparently that's not here. You've poisoned her against us, filled her head with lies about how terrible we are." Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs, a duffel bag over her shoulder and a cat carrier in her hand. She looked at me, then at her grandmother, and her voice was steady when she spoke. "Nobody had to tell me anything, Grandma. I heard it myself. I recorded it, remember?" Mother's face went white. Sophie walked down the stairs with careful dignity, like she was trying not to spook a dangerous animal. Emily handed me a folder of papers without meeting my eyes. "Temporary guardianship agreement," she said. "My lawyer drew it up. It's voluntary legal witnessed. She's yours until I can function like a human being again." I looked at the documents, then at Sophie standing there with her whole life packed into one bag and a cat carrier. "You're sure about this?" Sophie nodded. "I'm sure." We drove back to my rental in silence. Sophie sat in the passenger seat with the cat carrier on her lap, staring out the window. The cat, a small tortoiseshell, made plaintive sounds the whole way. When we pulled up to my building, Sophie finally spoke. "It's smaller than I thought it would be." "I know. Just temporary until I figure out what comes next." "It's okay. Small is fine." We got her settled in the tiny second bedroom, which was really more of an office with a daybed. Sophie let the cat out and it immediately hid under the bed. Max sniffed around the doorway, curious but respectful. Sophie unpacked her bag, methodically hanging clothes in the closet, setting up her laptop on the desk. She didn't cry, didn't complain, just went through the motions like she'd done this before. That evening I made pasta. Simple, nothing fancy. Sophie appeared in the kitchen and asked if she could help. We worked in comfortable silence, her chopping vegetables while I boiled water and heated sauce. The quiet felt strange at first, almost uncomfortable in its lack of tension. No one was performing. No one was managing anyone else's emotions. We were just two people making dinner. Sophie set the table without being asked. We sat down to eat, Max settling between our chairs hopefully. Halfway through the meal, Sophie looked around my small apartment, taking in the minimal furniture, the simple decor, the absence of chaos. "Is this what normal feels like?" she asked. I considered the question. "I don't know if this is normal, but it's what safe feels like." She nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something she'd suspected. We finished eating and cleaned up together, falling into an easy rhythm of wash and dry. Her cat finally emerged from under the bed and wound around Sophie's ankles. Max, ever patient, lay down and let the cat sniff him thoroughly before deciding he was acceptable. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, I heard soft sounds through the thin walls. Crying. Not hysterical or loud, just quiet, steady tears. I stood in the hallway, hand raised to knock, then decided against it. Sometimes people needed to cry in private. Sometimes the tears only came when you finally felt safe enough to let them fall. I went to bed thinking about that. About how Sophie had held herself together in that house full of adults who should have protected her, but instead used her as a pawn in their dysfunction. About how she'd only broken down after she was somewhere she didn't have to be strong anymore. Max wandered out of my room later, and when I checked, I found him curled up at the foot of Sophie's bed, her hand resting on his head, even in sleep. The cat was tucked against her chest. She looked younger in sleep, the careful guardedness finally gone from her face. I stood in that doorway and realized something that made my throat tight. I didn't save her. She saved me from becoming them. Sophie settled into my small rental with surprising ease. She had online classes from the villa situation, so she'd work at the kitchen table with her laptop while I handled client calls from my bedroom office. We developed a rhythm quickly, the kind that comes from two people who both value quiet and respect boundaries. She'd make coffee in the mornings before I woke up. I'd cook dinner at night and she'd clean up after. Neither of us talked much, but the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. We were two people learning to breathe in the same space without taking up all the oxygen. I didn't know about the video until Sophie showed it to me 3 days after she'd moved in. She came into the living room where I was sketching preliminary designs for a client, her phone in her hand, and an odd expression on her face. "Aunt Maggie, you need to see this." She turned the screen toward me. The video was clearly shot from across the street, shaky phone camera footage from someone's front porch. The angle showed the villa's driveway and front entrance perfectly. The timestamp showed it was from the day the Harrisons had done their inspection, the day everything had come apart. Emily's voice rang out clearly, high-pitched and frantic. "My sister gave us this house. She can't just take it back. We have nowhere else to go." Susan Harrison's response was calm, almost serene in contrast. "Your sister never gave you this house. She protected it for your daughter." "My daughter doesn't need protection from her own mother." Emily's face was red, her hands gesturing wildly. In the background, I could see my mother trying to insert herself into the conversation, and Robert standing firm with his document folder. The video ended with Emily storming back into the house and slamming the door. The caption read, "Entitled family tries to squat in teens' trust property. The audacity is unreal." "How many views?" I asked, my voice strangely calm. Sophie scrolled. "It's at 400,000. It was posted yesterday to a local Facebook group. Someone shared it to Twitter, then TikTok picked it up this morning." I watched it again. Then a third time. There was something surreal about seeing that moment from an outside perspective, seeing Emily's entitlement and the Harrisons' professionalism captured in crisp digital video. The neighbor who'd recorded it had apparently been dealing with weeks of noise and drama from Emily's family and decided to document the chaos. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked carefully. I looked at her. "I don't know yet." By that evening, the video had hit 1 million views. Sophie showed me the TikTok trend that had emerged, people using the audio clip of Emily saying, "My sister gave us this house," and responding with various versions of, "Tell me you're entitled without telling me you're entitled." The comments sections were brutal. "The aunt is a literal hero for protecting that kid's inheritance. This is financial abuse but backwards. Imagine treating your sister like a bank." The way the trustee stayed calm while this woman screamed at her icon behavior. "Plot twist, the daughter probably has no idea the house is legally hers." That last comment made me glance at Sophie, who was reading over my shoulder. She met my eyes and said quietly, "I know now." My mother called at 9 that night, her voice shaking with rage. "What did you do? What did you tell people? This video is everywhere. Everyone is talking about us." "I didn't post that video, Mom. I didn't even know it existed until today." "Well, someone posted it. Someone is trying to destroy this family. Emily can't leave the house without people recognizing her and making comments. Do you know what this is doing to her?" "I know what you did to me for 30 years, I said. "Maybe this is what accountability looks like." "Accountability. This is public humiliation. This is cruel." "You're right," I said. "Public humiliation is cruel. You should know. You did it to me at Emily's wedding in front of 200 people. You just didn't have social media to amplify it." She hung up on me. The story grew over the next 48 hours in ways I couldn't have predicted. Local news picked it up first, running a segment about family disputes and trust fund protections. The Chiron read, "Coastal Villa becomes center of family property battle." They interviewed a lawyer about trust structures and the rights of minors in property ownership. They didn't name us directly, but everyone in Seabrook knew exactly who they were talking about. Then the internet sleuths started digging. Someone found Emily's Facebook page, which she'd apparently forgotten to make private. Screenshots started circulating of posts from when she'd first moved into the villa. Photos of the living room with captions like, "New chapter, so grateful for family who support us in hard times," with a house emoji and sparkle emoji. Comments from her friends. "Your sister is so generous," Emily's reply. "She finally understands what family means." But other screenshots showed older posts from years before, back when I'd first bought the villa. Emily had shared a local news article about my business, and the comments were telling. "Must be nice to have money while the rest of us struggle. Some people forget where they came from." Her friends had piled on, and Emily had never corrected them, never mentioned that she'd been the reason I'd left home with nothing in the first place. Someone else found photos from Emily's wedding and posted them side by side. Emily in her elaborate white gown that had cost more than a used car. Me in a borrowed navy dress sitting at a back table, face carefully neutral. The caption, "This is the sister who finally understands family. The same sister who gave them $15,000 for this wedding 20 years ago and never got paid back." I didn't know who was leaking these details. Maybe David finally done with keeping secrets. Maybe someone from the old neighborhood who remembered. Maybe just the inevitable truth that emerges when people start looking closely enough. The hashtag started on Tuesday. Someone created it almost as a joke, but it caught on. Justice for MC. I saw it trending in the local area, saw people sharing stories about their own family members who'd exploited them, who'd taken and then called them selfish for asking for anything back. I became a symbol for something I'd never intended to represent. I didn't engage with any of it. Didn't post, didn't comment, didn't acknowledge the attention. But late at night, after Sophie had gone to bed, I'd scroll through the comments on my phone, reading what strangers had to say about my life. She didn't just protect her niece's inheritance, she protected her niece from becoming like the rest of them. Imagine being so entitled you think your sister's house is yours just because you need it. The real villain is the mother who raised them both to think one daughter mattered and one didn't. I hope that aunt knows she's not the villain in this story. She's the only adult in that family acting like an adult. For 30 years, I'd carried the weight of their judgment, their disappointment, their certainty that I was selfish, ungrateful, cold. I'd left home believing I was the problem, that there was something wrong with me that made me unworthy of their love. Now I watched the world judge them instead and felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Vindication. The deep, bone-level relief of knowing I wasn't crazy. That what they'd done to me wasn't normal or acceptable or justified. That I had every right to protect myself and Sophie from people who used family as a weapon rather than a refuge. I used to fear their judgment. Now I watched the world judge them. The viral video changed something in the atmosphere of my small rental. Sophie moved through the apartment more freely, like she'd been holding her breath and could finally exhale. She stopped checking her phone obsessively, stopped flinching every time a notification came through. The world had seen what I'd seen, had judged what I'd been judged for noticing, and somehow that validation made both of us feel less alone. I still had grandmother's boxes in my storage unit. After finding the insurance documents, I'd brought them all up to my apartment, thinking I should go through everything systematically, rather than leaving pieces of the past scattered in a basement. Most evenings after Sophie went to her room to study or read, I'd sit on the living room floor with Max beside me and sort through decades of accumulated paper. Recipes on index cards, church bulletins from the 1990s birthday cards I'd made for grandmother in crayon and marker. Evidence of a woman who'd kept everything that mattered to her, including things no one else would have valued. I was near the bottom of the third box, almost ready to call it done, when I found the envelope. It had been tucked into a Bible, the old leather-bound kind with gilt-edged pages and ribbon bookmarks. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive stationery sealed with actual wax that had cracked with age. The handwriting on the front was grandmother's, shakier than her usual precise script, like she'd been upset when she wrote it. To my daughter, open only when you're ready to forgive yourself. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. This wasn't meant for me. It was addressed to my mother, written by a woman who'd been dead for 21 years. Opening someone else's mail felt wrong, even when that someone had stolen $200,000 from you, and that mail had been sitting in a box for 2 decades. But grandmother was gone. Mother was toxic. And I needed to understand why my entire childhood had been sacrificed on the altar of Emily's insecurity. If there were answers in this envelope, I'd earned the right to them. I slid my finger under the flap, breaking the brittle wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper dated September 1993. The year they'd discovered Emily wasn't their biological child. I would have been 6 years old. The handwriting was worse than on the envelope, hasty and emotional words underlined for emphasis, whole sentences that seemed to tremble on the page. "My dearest daughter," it began. "I am writing this because I cannot say these words to your face without losing my composure, and you need to hear them with clarity." I sat down heavily on the couch, Max immediately moving to press against my leg. "I know what you're thinking. I saw the adoption agency pamphlets hidden in your desk drawer. I know you've been researching how to correct the mistake, as you put it to your husband when you thought I couldn't hear. I know you don't feel that Emily is yours, and I know the betrayal you feel at discovering she never was." My hands started shaking. I had to read that paragraph twice to make sure I understood what grandmother was saying. "But if you abandon her, you won't just lose her. You'll lose yourself. You'll lose your real daughter too, because you'll never forgive yourself for being capable of such cruelty. A 3-year-old child you've raised since birth cast aside because she doesn't share your blood. That's not a mistake you recover from. That's a wound that poisons everything it touches." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I blinked them away, needing to read the rest. "I can already see it happening. You're starting to pull away from Margaret. You look at her and see your own guilt reflected back. She's the evidence of what you're considering proof that you value biology over love, that you're the kind of mother who could throw away a child for being the wrong one. And because you can't bear to face that truth about yourself, you're making Margaret invisible. You're punishing your real daughter for reminding you what a monster you're capable of becoming." Grandmother's prophecy continued with devastating accuracy. "You'll overcompensate with the switched child. Every gift, every privilege, every moment of attention will be your attempt to prove you're not the woman who almost abandoned her. You'll smother Emily with everything Margaret needs, and you'll give Margaret nothing because she's the witness to your almost crime. You'll destroy your family trying to prove you're not a monster, but the destruction itself will prove you were one all along." I could barely see the page now. Tears were falling on the paper-smudging ink that had sat untouched for 32 years. "Please choose love over fear. Choose honesty over performance. Choose both your daughters, not just the one you're trying to make up for almost betraying. If you can't do this, if you proceed down this path, you'll look back one day and realize you sacrificed everything real for something false. You'll have proven your love to the child who isn't yours, while destroying the one who is." The letter ended with a simple plea. "I'm begging you as your mother, as Margaret's grandmother, as someone who loves both these girls, don't do this. Don't let guilt make you cruel. Don't let fear make you a liar. Choose better. Choose love. Please." It was signed, "Your mother who loves you but won't watch you destroy yourself and your family without trying to stop you." I sat there on my couch in my tiny rental apartment, holding a letter my grandmother had written to stop my mother from making a terrible choice. A letter my mother had apparently never opened, or had opened, and ignored, or had opened, and been so devastated by that she'd hidden it away, where she'd never have to face it again. Grandmother had seen it all, had predicted exactly what would happen, had warned my mother with perfect clarity what the cost would be. And my mother had done it anyway, had walked straight into the prophecy like she was following stage directions, had sacrificed me to prove she wasn't the kind of person who would abandon Emily. I read the letter again, then a third time. Each reading added another layer of understanding, another piece of the puzzle clicking into horrible place. My mother hadn't hated me. She'd hated herself. Every time she looked at me, she saw the choice she'd almost made, the darkness she was capable of, the monster she'd nearly become. I was the mirror that reflected her own capacity for cruelty, and instead of facing that reflection, she'd simply stopped looking at me. She'd made me invisible so she wouldn't have to see what I represented. I thought about all those years of being ignored, dismissed, taken for granted. All those moments when I'd tried so hard to be good enough, smart enough, helpful enough to earn her attention. I'd thought I was failing some impossible standard, but I hadn't been failing at all. I'd been succeeding at being exactly what I was supposed to be, and that was the problem. I was her real daughter, the one she hadn't almost abandoned, and that made me the evidence of what she was capable of if the circumstances were slightly different. Sophie appeared in the doorway, probably hearing me cry. "Aunt Maggie, are you okay?" I looked up at her, this girl who was living proof that cycles could be broken, that you could escape the legacy of people who loved through fear instead of truth. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. "I'm okay," I said. "I just finally understand something I should have understood a long time ago." She didn't hate me. She hated the choice she almost made. I just reminded her of it every day. Understanding why my mother had done what she'd done didn't mean forgiving her for it. Grandmother's letter explained the psychology, the guilt, the fear that had driven 30 years of cruelty. But explanation isn't absolution. My mother had made choices day after day, year after year, to protect herself from her own conscience at my expense. And one of those choices had been to forge my signature and steal $200,000 that my grandmother had left specifically to protect me from exactly that kind of exploitation. I called my attorney the morning after I found the letter. Her name was Jennifer Park, 32 years old, hungry and brilliant, the kind of lawyer who took cases because they mattered, rather than because they paid well. When I'd first consulted her about the insurance fraud, she'd leaned forward across her desk and said something that had sealed my decision to hire her. "This isn't about the money, this is about justice for the child you were." Now, 3 months after I'd first brought her the documents, we were finally ready to file. Jennifer had been meticulous, gathering every piece of evidence, having the forged signature analyzed by 3 separate handwriting experts, obtaining sworn statements from the insurance company about the claim process. The case was airtight. My mother had committed fraud, forgery, and embezzlement of funds from a minor. The evidence was so overwhelming that Jennifer had told me most lawyers would advise their client to settle rather than go to trial. My mother's lawyer tried exactly that. An offer came 2 weeks before the trial date. $50,000, no admission of wrongdoing, everyone moves on with their lives. Jennifer called me with the offer, and I could hear the disdain in her voice before she even asked what I wanted to do. "Tell them no," I said. "Tell them we'll see them in court." The lawyer tried one more strategy, filing a motion to dismiss based on statute of limitations. Most fraud cases had to be filed within 3 years of discovery. But Jennifer had anticipated this, had research ready showing that when fraud is actively concealed, the clock doesn't start until the victim actually discovers the crime. I'd only found the insurance documents 9 months ago. The motion was denied. The trial was set for a Tuesday morning in late September. Sophie asked if she could come, and I said no. This wasn't something a 14-year-old needed to witness, watching her grandmother face criminal accusations in a courtroom. But I knew she'd find out about it anyway. Knew the local media would be there because of the viral video situation. Knew this would be one more chapter in the public unraveling of my family. The courthouse was smaller than I'd expected, older, with that particular smell of floor wax and old wood that all government buildings seem to share. Jennifer met me outside, looking sharp in a navy suit, her briefcase full of organized evidence. My mother arrived with her lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 50s who kept glancing at his client like he wished he'd never taken the case. Our eyes met across the courthouse steps. She looked older, grayer, diminished. She looked away first. The trial was mercifully brief. Jennifer had told me it would be that with evidence this clear, there wasn't much to argue about. She presented the insurance policy, the forged signature, my testimony that I'd never received any money or even known about the policy until this year. The insurance company had sent a representative who confirmed that the claim had been filed by someone using my identification, that the check had been deposited into an account belonging to my mother. The handwriting experts testified that the signature was definitely not mine, that it showed characteristics consistent with someone trying to mimic my handwriting, but getting the pressure and flow wrong. My mother took the stand looking defiant, like she'd convinced herself there was a way to spin this into something defensible. Her lawyer asked her to explain what had happened to the money. "I used it to raise her," she said, voice steady. "I fed her, clothed her, kept a roof over her head. That money went to family expenses, to keeping the household running. She benefited from it even if she didn't receive it directly." Jennifer stood for cross-examination, and I saw the precise moment she went for the throat. "So you admit you took the $200,000? My mother hesitated, realizing the trap. "I used it for family expenses." "That's not what I asked. Did you take the money that was legally designated for your daughter?" "It went to the family. She was part of the family." "Mrs. Chen, yes or no? Did you forge your daughter's signature and deposit a check meant for her into your own account?" Silence. Then quietly, "It was for the family." Jennifer turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the defendant has just admitted to taking the funds." The judge was a woman in her mid-60s with steel-gray hair and the kind of face that had seen everything twice. She looked at my mother with something close to disgust. "Mrs. Chen, the family you're referring to included the rightful beneficiary you defrauded. You didn't use that money for her benefit. You used it to ease your own financial situation while she worked 2 jobs as a teenager to support your household. I've read the depositions. I've seen the evidence. This is one of the clearer cases of fraud I've encountered." She ruled from the bench, not even bothering to take time to deliberate. $500,000 in damages representing the original amount, plus 20 years of compound interest at the rate it should have earned, plus penalties for fraud and emotional damages. My mother's face went white. Her lawyer put his head in his hands. Outside the courthouse, media had gathered. Not just local reporters, but camera crews apparently drawn by the viral video situation and the human interest angle of a stolen inheritance case. Jennifer had prepared me for this, had helped me draft a statement that said what needed to be said without being cruel. I stood on the courthouse steps, squinting in the bright autumn sun, and read from the paper in my trembling hands. This money was my grandmother's final gift to protect me from the family she saw was failing me. She knew I would need it. She tried to ensure I'd have it. My mother stole it before I was old enough to even know it existed. Today, justice honored my grandmother's memory and her intention. I paused, looked directly at the cameras. Every penny of this judgment will go into my niece Sophie's trust fund. It will be used to protect her future, to ensure she has choices and security to give her what my grandmother tried to give me. To break the cycle that damaged 2 generations. That's what this was always about. Not revenge, protection. I folded the paper and walked to my car, Jennifer at my side, running interference with reporters who wanted follow-up questions. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I saw a familiar car parked across the street. Emily sat in the driver's seat watching. Our eyes met for a moment through the windshields. I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Not anger or jealousy. Understanding. Maybe even respect. She was realizing what I'd actually done. I wasn't punishing them. I was making sure Sophie never had to survive what I'd survived. I was ensuring the next generation had protection, had choices, had someone who would fight for her instead of using her. That somehow seemed to hurt Emily more than any amount of revenge could have. I didn't take revenge. I took back what was stolen and gave it to someone who deserved it. The judgment from the lawsuit took 2 weeks to process. $500,000 minus legal fees transferred into Sophie's trust fund. The Harrisons helped me restructure everything to accommodate the additional assets, setting up investment accounts that would grow over the next decade until Sophie turned 25. It was more money than I'd ever seen in one place, and all of it going to protect a girl who'd already been through more family dysfunction than any teenager should have to witness. Sophie was back in school now, having enrolled at Seabrook High for the fall semester. She'd leave in the mornings with her backpack and come home in the afternoons to do homework at my kitchen table. And slowly she was starting to look like a normal kid instead of someone braced for the next disaster. Emily was still in the villa, presumably dealing with the 30-day notice the Harrisons had extended twice, while she figured out her next move. We didn't talk. I got updates through David, who texted occasionally with logistical questions about Sophie's schedule or permission slips that needed signing. So when David asked to meet me for coffee, I was immediately suspicious. He'd been supportive throughout Sophie's move, had even thanked me for taking her in, but we'd maintained careful distance. He was still married to Emily, still technically part of the family that had spent decades using me as their personal bank account. I wasn't sure what we had to say to each other beyond the necessary coordination around Sophie's care. But something in his text felt urgent, so I agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown, public and neutral, where neither of us would feel trapped. He looked terrible. That was my first thought when I saw him waiting at a corner table, 2 cups of coffee already ordered. David had always been neat, put together, the kind of man who wore button-down shirts even on weekends. Now he looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 months. His hair was grayer at the temples, his face drawn shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. He stood when he saw me, that ingrained politeness still functioning even when everything else appeared to be falling apart. "Maggie, thank you for meeting me. I know this is awkward." I sat down across from him, accepting the coffee he pushed toward me. "What's going on, David?" He pulled a manila envelope from his messenger bag and set it on the table between us, his hand resting on it like he was still deciding whether to go through with whatever this was. "I've been working as the accountant for your parents for about 3 years now. Emily asked me to help them organize their finances after your dad's business collapsed. I thought it would be simple bookkeeping, helping them file taxes, basic stuff." He slid the envelope toward me. "I found irregularities." I opened it carefully. Inside were photocopies of tax returns, bank statements, receipts that didn't match reported income. I'm not an accountant, but even I could see the problems. Unreported rental income from a property I didn't know they owned, business deductions that looked personal, cash deposits that appeared nowhere on tax forms, years and years of small frauds that added up to significant tax evasion. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. Conservatively, they've avoided paying about $150,000 in taxes over the last decade, maybe more. I stopped counting after I realized how deep it went. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of exhausted frustration. "I tried to talk to them about it. Suggested we file amended returns, pay the back taxes before it became a bigger problem. Your mother laughed at me. Said everyone fudges their taxes a little, that the IRS would never notice. Your father just looked at the floor like he always does." "So what did you do?" David met my eyes. "I reported it, anonymously, to the IRS, 6 months ago." The words hung in the air between us. I set down my coffee, carefully processing what he was telling me. "The IRS is investigating them." "They are. They've been quiet about it, but I know how these things work. They gather evidence, build their case, and then they come in with everything at once. When that happens, it's going to destroy everything. Your parents will face penalties, possibly criminal charges. Emily's name is on some of the documents, joint accounts they used for the fraud. She could be charged as an accessory, even though she had no idea what they were doing." I studied his face, trying to understand why he was telling me this. "Why did you do it? Report them, I mean." "Because it was right. Because I couldn't be complicit in fraud, not even for family. Because I kept thinking about Sophie growing up, watching her grandparents break the law and get away with it, learning that integrity is optional if you can avoid getting caught." He looked down at his hands. "I did it because I thought it was the right choice. Now I'm not sure. Now I just feel like I'm going to destroy the woman I love and leave her daughter without a mother because Emily is going to fall apart when this hits." Why are you telling me this? Because when it happens, Sophie will need someone. Emily is barely holding it together as it is. When her parents go down, when she realizes she might face charges too, she's going to shatter completely. Your parents will turn on everyone, blame everyone, maybe even try to throw Emily under the bus to save themselves. He looked at me with something close to desperation. You're the only stable person in this disaster. Sophie needs to know someone will catch her when everything collapses. I thought about this man sitting across from me who'd married into my toxic family, and somehow maintained enough integrity to blow the whistle on financial crimes, even knowing it would hurt someone he loved. You love her, Emily. God help me, yes. His voice cracked slightly. I love her even though she's weak and selfish and has spent our entire marriage prioritizing her parents' approval over our actual family. I love her even though she helped destroy you without a second thought. I love her, and I reported her parents anyway, because I can't let Sophie grow up thinking this is normal. That lying and stealing and using people is just what families do. We sat in silence for a moment. I looked at the envelope full of evidence at this exhausted man who'd chosen integrity over the easy path of looking the other way. What do you want from me? I finally asked. Nothing. I don't want anything. I just wanted you to know that I tried to stop them before all of this. Before the villa, before the trust fund, before everything went public. I tried to get them to come clean to fix it themselves. They wouldn't listen. They never listen. He stood gathering his things. I chose integrity over family, and it's killing me. But I'd do it again. I'd do it every time. He was halfway to the door when I called after him. David. He turned back. Thank you for protecting Sophie. For teaching her that some things matter more than keeping peace. That's what parents do. His eyes filled with tears he didn't let fall. I'm not her father. Not the way that matters. Not biologically. I thought about grandmother's letter about my mother's obsession with blood ties, about Emily knowing since 12 that she wasn't biologically theirs, and spending her whole life proving she belonged anyway. You're more her father than your father-in-law ever was. Biology is overrated. What matters is who shows up, who makes the hard choices, who puts the kid first even when it costs them everything. He nodded once, then left. I sat there with my cooling coffee and an envelope full of evidence that my parents' legal troubles were just beginning. David had chosen integrity over family loyalty, and it was destroying him. But he'd do it again. Maybe some people can change after all. David's prediction came true exactly 3 weeks later. I was working on a client proposal when Sophie came running from her room phone in her hand, eyes wide. Aunt Maggie, turn on the news. Right now. I grabbed the remote and switched on the local station. The afternoon news was showing live footage from a residential street I recognized immediately. My parents' neighborhood. My parents' house. 3 dark sedans were parked in the driveway, and federal agents in windbreakers marked with IRS criminal investigation were carrying boxes out the front door. Neighbors lined the sidewalk, phones held up recording everything. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking local family under federal investigation for tax fraud." Sophie sat down next to me on the couch, her hand finding mine. We watched in silence as my mother appeared in the doorway screaming at an agent who was loading a computer tower into one of the vehicles. The camera was too far away to catch her exact words, but her body language communicated rage and disbelief. An agent handed her papers, probably the warrant, and she swatted them away. Another agent spoke to her calmly, and she finally stepped back inside, still shouting. My father appeared next, walking slowly to his car with an agent beside him. Even from the news helicopter footage, I could see how broken he looked. Shoulders hunched, head down, the physical manifestation of a man who'd finally run out of ways to avoid consequences. The reporter's voiceover explained that agents had executed a search warrant as part of an ongoing investigation into substantial tax fraud, spanning nearly a decade. Then, Emily appeared. She'd apparently been staying at my parents' house probably since the situation at the villa had become untenable. She stood frozen on the front lawn, still in pajama pants, watching federal agents carry away boxes of documents and hard drives. A neighbor tried to comfort her, and Emily shook her off, walking back inside like she was in a trance. "Is this because of you?" Sophie asked quietly. I turned to look at her. This girl who'd been through so much already, who'd watched her entire family structure collapse in the space of a few months. "No, this is because of choices they made long before I came back into the picture. Your grandfather and grandmother have been committing tax fraud for years. Someone reported it. The government investigated. This is what happens when the investigation finds evidence." "But you knew it was coming. Dad told you." "He told me it was happening. He didn't ask me to stop it. Neither of us could have stopped it even if we wanted to." I squeezed her hand. "The truth doesn't need permission to exist, Sophie. It just needs someone to stop covering it up." By evening, the story had exploded beyond local news. The reporters had done what reporters do, connecting dots and building narrative. Someone had linked the IRS raid to the viral villa video from 2 months ago. Someone else had dug up court records from my lawsuit. The story wrote itself wealthy family presence perfect facade, while systematically exploiting and defrauding their own daughter for decades, then faces exposure when she finally fights back. It was the kind of tale that confirmed everyone's suspicions about seemingly perfect families hiding rot underneath. The headlines appeared across news sites and social media throughout the night. "Golden Child Families' Dark Secrets Exposed." "Woman Sues Mother Uncovers Fraud Ring." "Trust Fund Protection Leads to Federal Tax Case." Someone had put together a timeline with screenshots starting with Emily's wedding photos from 2007, where I sat unnoticed in the back, moving through my years of absence, landing on the villa video, then the lawsuit, now the federal investigation. "Trust Fund Baby Becomes Hero After Aunt's Intervention," read one particularly dramatic headline. Reporters started camping outside my rental the next morning. I could see them from my window vans with satellite dishes, people with cameras and microphones waiting for me to emerge. Jennifer called to advise me to say nothing, but I knew silence would be interpreted as guilt or shame. I wasn't guilty. I wasn't ashamed. I'd simply stopped allowing myself to be exploited, and the natural consequences of their actions had followed. I wrote a statement and gave it to the reporter from the local paper who'd covered my lawsuit. She printed it in full, and by that afternoon it had been picked up everywhere. I didn't create this situation. I just stopped enabling it. The truth has its own momentum. When you stop covering for people who harm you, their actions become visible. That's not revenge. That's accountability. The quote went viral in a different way than the villa video had. People started using it as a caption on posts about toxic families, about boundaries, about refusing to protect people from the consequences of their own choices. It showed up on Instagram over minimalist backgrounds, turned into motivational graphics, shared and reshared until it stopped being about my specific situation and became something larger. A permission slip for people to stop setting themselves on fire to keep others warm. The family implosion accelerated from there. My parents' assets were frozen pending the investigation, which meant they couldn't access savings or retirement accounts to pay for lawyers. Emily discovered her name appeared on several of the fraudulent documents, joint accounts they'd used to hide income tax forms, where she'd been listed as a business partner in ventures that didn't exist. She was facing potential charges as an accessory, even though David swore she'd had no knowledge of what they were doing. She'd simply signed what they told her to sign, trusted that her parents wouldn't use her to commit crimes. David filed for legal separation 3 days after the raid. Not divorce yet, but separation, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting primary physical custody of Sophie with supervised visitation for Emily. The paperwork was public record, and reporters found it immediately. "Husband Flees Tax Fraud Family," read one particularly cruel headline. My mother called me on a Friday evening. I almost didn't answer, but Sophie was at a school event, and I was alone with my thoughts, so I picked up. "Please." Her voice was raw, stripped of the commanding tone I'd known my whole life. "Please, Maggie, make this stop. Tell them you forgive us. Tell them to leave us alone." "I can't stop federal investigators," I said, my voice empty of emotion. "They don't care about family dynamics or forgiveness. They care about tax law and evidence. This is what happens when crimes have consequences. We didn't mean for any of this to happen. We were just trying to survive. You survived by stealing from me, by defrauding the government, by using Emily without her knowledge. You taught me that actions have consequences, that I should take responsibility for my choices. I finally learned the lesson. Maybe it's time you learned it too. We're your family. The desperation in her voice was almost physical. You stopped being my family the day you chose guilt over love. The day you decided Emily needed to be compensated for not being yours, and I needed to be punished for being yours. You just didn't realize I'd stopped being your victim. I paused, let the words sink in. I'm not doing this to you. You did this to yourselves. I'm just not saving you from it anymore. She hung up. Or maybe I did. It didn't matter. I stood at my window watching the news vans pack up for the night, moving on to other stories, other scandals. They'd be back when the indictments came down, when the trial happened, when the next dramatic chapter unfolded. My family had wanted to be seen, to be validated, to be recognized as successful and special and worthy of admiration. They wanted the spotlight. Now they had it, just not the way they'd planned. The media attention lasted about a week before moving on to other scandals, other stories. But the damage was permanent. My parents' names were searchable now, forever linked to tax fraud and family exploitation. Emily had deleted all her social media accounts. My father had apparently stopped going outside, except for mandatory meetings with lawyers he couldn't afford. The house was quiet, neighbors told me later, like everyone inside had simply stopped existing in any meaningful way. I didn't expect the call that came on a Wednesday evening. An unfamiliar number which I almost ignored, but something made me answer. Is this Margaret Chen? A professional female voice, calm but urgent. Yes. This is Seabrook General Hospital. Your mother has been brought in by ambulance. She suffered what appears to be a severe stroke. We're listing you as next of kin since we haven't been able to reach your sister. Can you come to the hospital? I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, feeling absolutely nothing for a long moment. Then, I'll be there in 15 minutes. Sophie looked up from her homework when I grabbed my keys. What's wrong? Your grandmother had a stroke. I need to go to the hospital. Do you want me to come? Not yet. I'll call you when I know more. The ICU was on the third floor, sterile and hushed in that particular way hospitals have, where every sound feels like an intrusion. A nurse directed me to room 312, where my mother lay hooked to machines that beeped and hissed, keeping her alive through mechanical intervention. She looked smaller than I remembered, older. Her face slack on one side, an oxygen tube in her nose. Fragile. Suddenly devastatingly human. My father sat in the chair beside her bed, staring at nothing. He didn't look up when I entered, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. We existed in the same space, like strangers in an elevator, avoiding eye contact, avoiding everything. A doctor appeared, young and tired, holding a tablet. Ms. Chen, I'm Dr. Rashid. Your mother suffered a severe ischemic stroke, likely caused by a blood clot that blocked circulation to the left side of her brain. We've administered medications to try to break up the clot, but the next 48 hours are critical. There's significant damage. Even if she survives, she'll likely face partial paralysis and cognitive impairment. Will she wake up? We don't know yet. Right now we wait. Emily arrived 3 hours later, looking like she'd been dragged through hell. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy knot. She wore sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, no makeup, eyes red and empty. She looked at our mother, looked at our father, then at me, and seemed to deflate entirely, sinking into the second chair without a word. We sat there through the night, the three of us, in a vigil that felt more like purgatory. No one spoke. Emily cried silently every so often. Father stared at the floor or the machines or his hands, never at any of us. I watched my mother breathe with mechanical assistance and felt a complicated tangle of emotions I couldn't name. Part vindication, part horror, part grief for something that had never existed in the first place. Around 3 in the morning, a nurse came in to check vitals. She adjusted the IV, made notes on her tablet, then noticed something in my mother's hand. Oh, she was holding this when the paramedics found her. Must have been writing when it happened. She extracted a crumpled piece of paper from my mother's clenched fist and held it out to me. I took it carefully, smoothed it out on my lap. The handwriting was my mother's, but barely recognizable, shaky and uncertain words, cramped together like she'd been fighting to get them out. "Dear MC, I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. Save Emily. Don't be like me." That was all. The words trailed off into an illegible scrawl where the pen had dragged across the page as she collapsed. 4 sentences. 30-some years of cruelty and damage, and in the end, 4 sentences was all she could manage. I read it 3 times while Emily slept fitfully in her chair, and Father continued his vigil of silence. I tried to feel something. Forgiveness, maybe. Or rage. Or satisfaction that she'd finally admitted fault. But all I felt was tired. Tired of carrying this weight. Tired of being angry. Tired of the endless cycle of hurt that had defined my entire relationship with the woman hooked to these machines. Sophie appeared in the doorway around 8 the next morning. I'd texted her the room number, told her she could come if she wanted. She stood there in her school uniform backpack still on her shoulders, looking at her grandmother's unconscious form with an expression I couldn't read. She sat down next to me, and after a while she asked the question I'd been asking myself all night. "Do you wish she'd die?" I looked at this 14-year-old who'd become the moral center of our broken family, and I gave her the only honest answer I had. Part of me does. Part of me wants her to die so I can finally stop carrying this. Part of me wishes I could save her just to prove I'm better than she was, that I can show mercy when she never could. I don't know which part wins. Sophie nodded slowly like she'd expected that answer. Maybe you don't have to choose. Maybe you just let her be human, bad and scared and sorry. All of it at once. I looked at her, this girl who'd learned wisdom the hard way by watching adults fail spectacularly at basic decency. When did you get so smart? When I realized adults are just kids who got old without getting answers. You're all still trying to figure out the same stuff I am. You just pretend you know what you're doing. She was right, of course. We were all just children who'd grown up without understanding how to love, without fear, how to protect, without controlling, how to forgive, without forgetting. My mother had been a child once, probably hurt by her own parents in ways I'd never know about, and she'd grown old without ever figuring out how to break the cycle. I stood up and moved to the bedside. My father finally looked at me, then his eyes empty of everything except exhaustion. I reached out and took my mother's hand, the one that wasn't attached to monitors. It was cool and dry, smaller than I remembered the hand of an old woman instead of the powerful figure who'd controlled my childhood. It felt like touching a stranger, someone I'd never known, someone who'd never known me. Even monsters get old. But does that make them human again? Mother didn't wake up the first day or the second. The doctors ran tests, adjusted medications, spoke in cautious medical language about brain swelling and neurological damage. Emily stayed in the hospital room, almost constantly sleeping in the uncomfortable chair, looking more haunted with each passing hour. Father came and went, never staying long, still unable to sit with his own choices, even when facing the consequences of them. I went home at night to be with Sophie, came back in the mornings, and existed in the strange limbo of waiting for someone to either live or die. On the 3rd day around noon, Mother's eyes opened. It took a moment for her to focus, for awareness to return to features that had been slack and empty. Her gaze moved around the room, taking in the machines, the hospital walls, finally landing on me sitting beside her bed. Emily had gone to get coffee. Father was wherever he went when he couldn't stand to be present. It was just the 2 of us, and when recognition filled her eyes, tears immediately followed. "You came," she whispered, her voice rough and weak, the words slightly slurred from the stroke's damage. "I came," I said. We looked at each other across decades of damage, across all the years of being invisible to her, while Emily shone bright and demanding. The silence stretched long enough that I thought maybe that was all we'd have, those two simple exchanges. Then she spoke again, each word clearly an effort. I was so afraid of losing the wrong daughter. I lost the right one. The admission hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened, and I had to swallow twice before I could respond. I needed you to choose me. Just once. That's all I ever needed. I know. More tears slid down her face, pooling awkwardly, because she couldn't move to wipe them away. I was too much of a coward. I thought if I loved Emily harder, gave her everything, it would make up for almost abandoning her. Prove I wasn't the kind of mother who could give away a child just because she wasn't mine. But I just abandoned you instead. Different method, same crime. I felt something crack in my chest, not quite breaking, but shifting, making space for a truth I'd spent 30 years trying to understand. You made me invisible because I reminded you of what you almost did. Every time I looked at you, I saw my own capacity for cruelty. You were proof that I could have been a monster. So I just stopped looking. She tried to lift her hand, the one I wasn't holding, but could barely move it. The stroke had stolen so much from her already. I can't fix this. I don't have time to fix this. No, I agreed. You don't. The brutal honesty seemed to devastate her more than anger would have. She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, there was a kind of desperate clarity there. Will you take care of Emily, please? She's so lost. She's been lost since she was 12, and I made her promise to live a lie. Since I told her the truth about who she wasn't, and then demanded she pretend it didn't matter. I thought about Emily falling apart in slow motion, facing potential criminal charges for fraud she didn't commit, married to a man who was leaving her because he couldn't watch the dysfunction anymore. I'll take care of Sophie. That's all I can promise. Emily has to figure out how to take care of herself. She's not a child anymore, even if you treated her like one for 30 years. Mother looked devastated, but she nodded, a tiny movement that cost her obvious effort. That's fair. That's more than fair. Her hand tightened slightly in mine, as much pressure as she could manage. You became everything I should have been. Strong, independent, good. I'm so proud of you. Her voice broke. I just never said it. I never told you any of the things you needed to hear. No, I said quietly. You didn't. I'm sorry. The words were barely audible. I'm so sorry, Margaret. For all of it. For every single day I made you feel like you didn't matter. I wanted to say I forgave her. It would have been the generous thing, the healing thing. But the words wouldn't come because they weren't true. I wasn't ready to forgive, might never be ready. But I could sit there with her, hold her hand, witness her regret, even if I couldn't absolve it. I know you are, I said instead. She slipped back into unconsciousness shortly after Emily returned. Emily rushed to the bedside, asking frantically what had happened, but I just shook my head. Some conversations weren't meant to be shared even between sisters. Mother's eyes stayed closed after that. The doctors said it was expected that brief moments of lucidity followed by decline were common with strokes this severe. She died at 4 a.m. on the 4th day. I was there because I couldn't sleep, had come back to the hospital in the middle of the night, drawn by some instinct I couldn't name. The monitors started alarming, nurses rushed in, but there was nothing to be done. Her brain had simply given up and her body followed. I held her hand through it, crying for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. Not for the mother she'd been, but for the mother she could have been. For the relationship we'd never have. For all the wasted years and wasted chances. Emily arrived 20 minutes too late, having gone home for a few hours of real sleep. She collapsed beside the bed, sobbing with the kind of grief that comes from knowing you'll never get answers to questions you should have asked years ago. Father stood in the corner, silent, as always, tears running down his face, but no sound emerging. We were a family united only by loss, by the woman who'd broken all of us in different ways. I made all the arrangements. Emily was incapable, barely functioning, and Father didn't have the money or the will. I called the funeral home, chose the casket, wrote the obituary that omitted all the scandal, and focused on the basics of a life lived. I paid for everything with money from the lawsuit money Mother had stolen from me that a judge had made her return. The irony wasn't lost on me. The funeral was small. The scandal had made them pariahs in the community they'd worked so hard to impress. A few of my parents' old friends came sitting uncomfortably in the front pews, not knowing what to say. David came and sat with Sophie. The Harrisons attended, sitting in the back, offering silent support. Emily cried through the entire service. Father stood and spoke briefly, words I barely registered because they felt meaningless. I didn't speak. I had nothing to say that would fit in a funeral service. We buried her on a gray afternoon in October, the ocean wind cutting through our coats. Sophie stood beside me, holding my hand, while Emily stood between David and Father, looking like she might collapse. As they lowered the casket, I felt something close to peace. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just the end of something that had taken too long to die. Some endings aren't justice, they're mercy. And mercy doesn't mean forgiveness. Father left the cemetery before anyone else, walking to his car alone while we stood around Mother's grave making awkward small talk with the few guests who'd come. I watched him drive away and didn't think much of it. He'd been disappearing emotionally for decades. This was just the physical manifestation. But when Emily called 3 days later, panicked because he wasn't answering his phone and hadn't been home since the funeral, I realized this disappearance was different. He'd taken clothes, his toiletries, emptied his bank account of the small amount that hadn't been frozen by the IRS investigation. He was gone in a way that felt permanent. "First Mom, now Dad," Emily said, her voice breaking. "Everyone's leaving me." "He's been leaving his whole life," I told her. "He just finally made it official." Emily filed a missing person report, but the police found nothing concerning. No signs of foul play, no evidence of self-harm. Just a man who'd walked away from a life that had collapsed around him. After 2 weeks, they closed the case. Adults were allowed to disappear if they wanted to. 6 weeks passed. Emily moved into a small apartment, facing her legal situation alone. David's separation was proceeding quietly. Sophie stayed with me, and we'd fallen into a routine that felt almost normal. She went to school, came home, did homework, helped with dinner. We were building something that looked like family, constructed from honesty instead of performance. Then Sophie came home on a Tuesday afternoon, walking through the door with a strange expression on her face. "I saw Grandpa today." I looked up from my laptop. "What?" "After school, me and some friends were walking through the industrial district by the marina. There was a guy cleaning windows on this office building, and I thought he looked familiar." She pulled out her phone, showed me a photo she'd taken from across the street. "It's him." I stared at the image. My father, in a maintenance uniform, bucket and squeegee in hand, cleaning second-floor windows. Older, grayer, wearing clothes I'd never seen him in, but definitely him. We drove there the next day during lunch hour. Found him sitting on a loading dock behind the building, eating a sandwich from a plastic container thermos of coffee beside him. He saw us approaching and went very still, but he didn't run. Just set down his sandwich and waited. I stood in front of him, Sophie slightly behind me, and couldn't find words for a long moment. Finally, I just asked, "Why?" He looked down at his hands, weathered and calloused in a way they'd never been when he ran his business. I couldn't face what I'd become. A man who let his wife destroy his daughter because I was too weak to say no. A man who stole from his own child through silence, through not stopping what was happening. He looked up at me then. "I couldn't fix it with apologies. Words are cheap. I've never been good with words anyway, so I'm fixing it the only way I know how." He pulled out his wallet, extracted pay stubs. $15 an hour, 50 hours a week working maintenance for an industrial cleaning company. Then his phone showing me bank transfer records. $500 every month transferred to an account in my name. Every month since Mother died. "You think money fixes this?" I asked, my voice harder than I intended. "No." He shook his head firmly. "I know it doesn't. but it's all I have. My hands, my work, and the ability to finally do what I should have done 30 years ago, prioritize your well-being over my comfort. He stood facing me directly for maybe the first time in my life. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking to be part of your life. I'm asking you to let me earn something other than contempt. Let me be useful in the only way I know how. Sophie stepped forward. Are you living okay? Do you have a place? Small studio apartment. It's enough. I don't need much. He looked at her with something like affection. You look like your grandmother. My mother, I mean. She had that same way of cutting through nonsense. We stood there in uncomfortable silence until his break ended. He gathered his lunch things, nodded once, and headed back inside. As we drove away, Sophie said quietly, He didn't run away from us. He ran toward being someone different. She was right. He didn't run away. He ran toward the man he should have been all along. I went back to see him 2 days later alone this time. Found him on his lunch break again, same loading dock, same simple meal. He looked up when I approached, but didn't speak, just waited for me to say whatever I'd come to say. You can't undo 30 years, I told him. You can't buy back the childhood where I needed a father and got a ghost. You can't erase standing silent while mother destroyed me day after day, year after year. He nodded, eyes on the ground. But Sophie needs a grandfather who shows up, not with money, with presence. I took a breath. You can see her. You can live in the guest room of my rental. I'm barely there anyway, working from client sites most days. But you don't get to play happy family. You don't get to sit at the dinner table like nothing happened. You earn your way back one day at a time, and some days you won't succeed. He looked up then, something like hope flickering across his face. What do I need to do? Keep working, keep showing up, be honest. That's it. Father moved in the following week with a single duffel bag of belongings. He kept his janitorial job, refusing my offer to help him find something easier. He left before dawn, came home after dinner, kept to himself. Slowly, he started making himself useful. He'd cook breakfast before anyone woke up, clean the apartment on his days off, tend the small patio garden I'd neglected. Sophie started staying after school some days, doing homework at the kitchen table while he prepared vegetables for dinner or fixed things that had broken. They talked about safe subjects, her algebra test, his work stories, the stray cat that had started visiting the patio. Nothing deep. Nothing that required excavating the past. Just two people learning to exist in the same space without hurting each other. Father never asked me for forgiveness. I never offered it. We existed in careful détente, navigating around each other like dancers who knew the steps but had never practiced together. The dinner table rule emerged without discussion. Father ate in his room or waited until Sophie and I had finished. It was absolute, unspoken understood. One evening, Sophie looked at his empty chair and asked, "Why doesn't Grandpa eat with us?" Because some wounds are too deep for casual dinner conversation to cross. Maybe one day. Not today. That seems sad. It's honest. Honest is better than pretending. I met her eyes. You can have dinner with him separately if you want. This boundary is mine, not yours. Sophie nodded, accepting this. What I didn't know until much later was that Father had been standing in the hallway, had heard every word. He told me years afterward that he'd cried silently, leaning against the wall, understanding that my mercy had limits, and those limits were healthy. That earning his way back might take the rest of his life, and even then he might never make it all the way. Forgiveness isn't a gift. It's something you earn one quiet day at a time. Sometimes you die before earning it. David's divorce papers came through in January. He didn't destroy Emily the way he could have. Joint custody of Sophie, reasonable visitation, but one non-negotiable condition: Emily had to complete a minimum of 6 months of therapy before unsupervised visits could resume. Emily, by then so broken down she had nothing left to fight with, agreed. What started as court-mandated therapy became something real. Her therapist, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, didn't let Emily hide behind excuses or victim narratives. Session by session, she helped Emily see the pattern: 26 years of running from the truth of who she was, using other people as shields against her own fear, leaving wreckage in her wake. Emily started to understand what she'd done to me, to Sophie, to herself. The work was painful and slow, the kind of excavation that requires facing things you've spent decades burying. She called me 4 months into therapy. Her voice was different, quieter, stripped of the performance I'd heard my entire life. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know I'm finally facing what I did. What I've been doing since I was 12. I'm not running anymore." Around the same time, she started volunteering at a women's shelter across town. 3 afternoons a week, helping mothers who were rebuilding their lives after leaving abusive situations. She taught basic budgeting, helped with job applications, organized donated clothes. The irony of someone facing fraud charges teaching financial literacy wasn't lost on her, but the women at the shelter didn't know about her scandal. She was just Emily who helped with paperwork, Emily who listened without judgment, Emily who understood what it meant to start over with nothing. She told me later that she saw herself in their stories, the justifications they'd made for staying, the ways they'd twisted reality to make abuse seem normal, the blame shifting that let them avoid seeing their own complicity. For the first time in her life, she was valued for service rather than performance, and it was terrifying and addicting in equal measure. She showed up at my rental on a Saturday morning in March, holding a terracotta pot with an herb garden sprouting inside. Basil, rosemary, thyme. "I remember Mom had one of these when we were kids," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I destroyed it during a tantrum when I was 15. I thought maybe we could plant one together, if you want. No pressure." I looked at the plant, then at Emily standing on my doorstep, genuinely humble for possibly the first time in her life. "Okay, let's plant it." We worked in silence on the small patio, kneeling in the dirt, our hands touching the same soil. Father watched from the kitchen window, but didn't intrude. Sophie came out briefly, saw what we were doing, and went back inside with a small smile. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me," Emily said, patting soil around the roots. "I don't know either." I sat back on my heels, looking at the planted herbs. But this is a start. This time we weren't rebuilding a house. We were planting something that might grow if we didn't kill it first. 15 years can pass in a strange way when you're busy living. The herb garden Emily and I planted that March morning grew wild and fragrant on my patio, requiring regular trimming. Sophie graduated high school, then college, then architecture school, becoming the kind of designer who prioritized sustainability and human impact over flashy aesthetics. Emily kept volunteering at the shelter, eventually taking a full-time position there, living simply in a small apartment she could actually afford. Father turned 80, still working part-time maintenance, still quiet, still showing up day after day without asking for more than he'd earned. And I kept designing, kept working, kept living in my small rental with Echo, the rescue dog I'd found after Max passed peacefully at 15. The letter came on a Tuesday in spring, 15 years, almost to the day after I'd first put the villa in Sophie's trust. An attorney I didn't recognize informing me that Robert and Susan Harrison had both passed away within months of each other peacefully in their 90s, and that their estate had instructions regarding Sophie's trust that required my presence. I drove to the attorney's office and found Sophie already there. 28, now poised and professional in a way that reminded me of myself at that age, except she carried none of my damage. She smiled when I entered, gestured to the chair beside her. "The Harrisons left letters," she said. "For both of us." The attorney handed us each an envelope. Mine was brief, written in Susan's shaky handwriting from what must have been near the end. "Dear Maggie, we kept your home safe. Now it's time for it to come back to you. Thank you for showing us that kindness doesn't require blood. With love, Susan and Robert." I looked up confused, and Sophie was already sliding documents across the desk. Villa deed transfer from Sophie Morgan to Margaret Chen, signed and notarized, dated the week before Susan died. "Sophie, no. That's your inheritance. Your security. You gave me something more valuable than a house, Sophie said, and her voice was steady, certain. You showed me what integrity looks like, what healthy boundaries look like, how to love people without losing yourself. I watched you refuse to be destroyed by people who should have protected you, and then I watched you protect me instead. That's the inheritance that matters. The villa should be yours. We drove there together that afternoon. I hadn't been inside in 15 years, hadn't even driven past it after the trust was established. The exterior looked pristine, better than I remembered. The Harrisons had maintained it perfectly, even updated some things, the roof looking new, the paint fresh. But the garden made me stop breathing. Every plant I'd sketched in my original designs 30 years ago had been planted and nurtured to maturity. The roses I'd imagined climbing the trellis were there, thick and flowering. The lavender I'd wanted lining the walkway created a purple river leading to the door. And in the center of it all, a small stone marker with an inscription, "To the woman who taught us homes are built with kindness, not walls. The Harrisons." I sat down right there on the garden path and cried. Sophie sat beside me, her hand on my shoulder, letting me grieve for two people who'd been more family to me than most of my blood relatives had ever managed. I texted Emily. She arrived an hour later, older and grayer, wearing jeans and the shelter's volunteer t-shirt, carrying nothing but herself. Father came too, having been at my rental feeding Echo when I'd left that morning. We stood together in that garden, 3 generations of damaged people who'd slowly, painfully learned how to be honest instead of performing. "Aunt Maggie," Sophie said, looking around at the restored villa, the mature garden, the ocean beyond. "Will you teach me to design like you, not the technical stuff? School taught me that. The heart stuff. How to build homes that heal people." That evening, after everyone had left, I stood on the villa porch watching the sun set over the ocean, the same view I'd fallen in love with 18 years ago. I pulled out my journal, the habit I'd inherited from grandmother, and wrote what I'd learned after all these years. 30 years ago, I lost a family built on lies. Today, I found one built on truth. The villa came back to me. But it took a long journey to deserve it. Not because I was perfect, because I finally learned you can't build a home until you know what home means. And home isn't where they love you unconditionally. It's where they love you honestly. I didn't win by taking back what was stolen. I won by building something worth returning to. And that's the story of Maggie. A woman who spent 30 years learning that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's honesty. This wasn't a revenge story. This was a story about protection, about breaking cycles, and about understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses. Maggie didn't destroy her family by exposing the truth. The truth simply revealed what had been destroying them all along. What strikes me most about this journey is how Maggie never became the monster she was fighting against. She had every reason to be cruel, to be vindictive, to use her power the way her family had used theirs. Instead, she chose something harder. She chose boundaries with mercy, justice, with compassion and protection over punishment. She showed us that you can refuse to be a victim without becoming a villain, that you can demand accountability without losing your humanity, and that forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone, but something that might grow naturally if the soil is prepared with honesty and time. Now, I want to know what you think. Do you believe Maggie should have forgiven her mother before she died, or was it enough to simply be present? What about Emily? After everything she put Maggie through, did she deserve the chance at redemption? Or should some betrayals be unforgivable? And here's the question that's been on my mind since I finished this story. If you were Sophie, would you have given the villa back to Maggie or kept it as the security you were promised? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I genuinely want to hear different perspectives on these impossible choices. There's no right answer, only honest ones. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or struggled with the question of how much you owe people just because you share blood, then you're not alone. Subscribe to this channel because every week we explore stories like this. Stories that don't shy away from the messy, complicated truth about family trauma and the long road to healing. These aren't fairy tales with perfect endings. They're real stories about real struggles and hard-won peace. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's been made to feel guilty for setting boundaries or who's been told they're selfish for choosing themselves, share this video with them. Sometimes we need to see someone else walk through the fire and come out whole on the other side before we believe we can do it too. Sometimes we need permission to stop being the family ATM, the eternal caretaker, the one who sacrifices everything and gets nothing in return. Consider this that permission. Thank you for staying with Maggie's story from that first devastating phone call all the way to the villa's return. Your time matters, and I'm honored you spent it here. See you in the next story. They say blood is thicker than water. But what they don't tell you is that blood can also drown you. I was 20 years old when my family stole $15,000 from me, my entire college fund to pay for my sister Emily's wedding. The golden child's perfect day. I was told it was temporary, a family loan. They never paid me back. Instead, they called me selfish for asking. So, I left. And for 20 years I heard nothing. No calls, no apologies, just silence. Until I bought my villa. It took me 2 decades to build my interior design business from nothing. 2 decades of sleeping on floors, eating instant ramen, saving every penny. And finally, at 38, I bought my dream a stunning coastal villa overlooking the ocean. My sanctuary. My proof that I didn't need them. Then my mother called. Emily's family lost their home. They're moving into your villa. You have space. It's decided. Not asked. Decided. I could have screamed, could have refused, but instead I said 6 words that changed everything. Of course, family helps family, right? They thought I'd surrendered. They thought I was still that scared 20-year-old girl they could control and manipulate. They had no idea what I'd prepared. Because when my golden sister and my parents walked through those villa doors, confident and entitled, they discovered something that shattered their world in ways they never saw coming. A trap so elegant, so legally bulletproof, they couldn't escape it. And the person caught in the middle, my 14-year-old niece who would force everyone to finally face the truth. This is the story of how I took back everything they stole and gave it to the one person who actually deserved it. Stick around. Trust me, you won't believe how this ends. My name is Margaret Chen, but most people call me Maggie. I'm 38 years old, an interior designer who built her business from absolutely nothing, and for the past 5 years, I've lived in the most beautiful place I've ever seen, a 1920s coastal villa that I restored with my own 2 hands. It's not just a house. It's proof that I survived. The morning the call came, I was doing what I did every morning, existing in the kind of peace I once thought was impossible. I woke at 6 like always to Max's cold nose pressed against my hand. He's a golden retriever mix I found half-starved behind a dumpster 3 years ago, and now he acts like he owns the place. Maybe he does. We're both rescues in our own way. I scratched behind his ears and followed him to the kitchen where the coffee maker was already programmed to brew. The smell alone is worth waking up for. I took my mug out to the deck, the one that wraps around the entire east side of the villa overlooking the ocean. The sun was just starting to burn off the morning fog, turning everything golden and soft. I sat in my favorite wicker chair, the one I reupholstered myself in weather-resistant linen, and watched the waves roll in with their endless methodical rhythm. Max settled at my feet with a contented sigh. This was my routine, my ritual, the life I'd built in careful, deliberate solitude. People think being alone means being lonely, but they're wrong. Loneliness is sitting in a room full of family who treat you like you're invisible. Solitude is choosing your own company and finding it enough. I'd learned the difference the hard way. After coffee, I worked in my home office for a few hours, finishing renderings for a client's beach house renovation. My business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. I was booked 6 months out with a waiting list. Around noon, I took a break to feed the stray cats that had claimed my garden as their territory. There were 4 regulars now: an orange tabby I called Hemingway, a sleek black cat named Midnight, and 2 tabbies I hadn't named yet because I kept telling myself I wasn't getting attached. I was crouched by the garden shed filling bowls with kibble when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something curiosity, instinct, stupidity made me swipe to accept. Margaret. My mother's voice. Not a question, a statement. Like she had the right to my name after 20 years of silence. I stood up slowly, the bag of cat food slipping from my hands. Max's ears perked up, sensing the change in me. "Mom," I said carefully, neutral, giving nothing away. "I'm calling about your sister." No preamble. No "how are you?" No acknowledgement of 2 decades of nothing. Just straight to business as if we'd spoken yesterday. "Emily and David lost their house. His business failed. They have nowhere to go." I waited. There had to be more. There was always more. "They need to stay somewhere while they get back on their feet. You have that big villa by the ocean. Plenty of room." Not a question. Not a request. A statement of fact delivered in the same tone she'd used when I was 20, and she told me my college fund was being borrowed for Emily's wedding. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea." "Don't be difficult, Margaret. You're her older sister. You have space, she has children. It's your responsibility." The word landed like a slap. Responsibility. As if I owed them something after everything they'd taken. "I live alone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my home, my private space. I can't or won't." Her voice sharpened. "Emily is family. She's struggling. She has a 14-year-old daughter to think about. What do you have, a dog and some cats?" The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. What do you have? As if my life, my peace, my carefully constructed sanctuary meant nothing because I hadn't produced children or maintained a marriage. "Mom, this isn't fair." Then I heard it. Muffled laughter in the background. My stomach dropped. "See, I told you she'd say no." Emily's voice, distant but clear, amused, like this was all a joke. I was on speakerphone. My mother wasn't calling to ask for help. She was performing. This entire conversation was theater, and I was the punchline. They were all there, Mom. Emily, probably. Dad sitting silent as always, listening to me squirm, waiting for me to refuse so Emily could play the victim. Poor Emily, cast out by her selfish sister who has everything and shares nothing. The rage that surged through me was so sudden, so visceral, I had to grip the edge of the garden table to stay upright. It was the same rage I'd felt at 20 when they stole my savings. The same rage I'd felt when they called me ungrateful for objecting. The same rage that had driven me to pack a single suitcase and disappear from their lives completely. But I wasn't 20 anymore. I wasn't powerless. And I'd learned something in 20 years of building a business, negotiating with clients, managing expectations. Sometimes the best response is the one they don't expect. I took a slow breath, steadied my voice, let the silence stretch just long enough to make them wonder. "You know what, Mom? You're right. Family helps family." I paused, let them absorb the apparent surrender. "Let me think about the logistics, and I'll call you back." More muffled sounds in the background. Surprise, maybe. Suspicion. "Well," my mother said, recovering quickly. "That's very mature of you, Margaret. I'll tell Emily to start packing." I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking. Max pressed against my legs, whining softly. I looked down at him, then out at the ocean, then at the villa I'd spent 5 years restoring, every window, every floorboard, every carefully chosen paint color. They thought I'd broken. They thought I was still that scared 20-year-old girl they could guilt and manipulate into sacrificing everything. They had no idea what they'd just walked into. I wasn't part of their family call. I was the punchline on speaker. But the joke I realized as I pulled up my lawyer's number was about to be on them. I sat on my deck for a long time after that phone call, watching the fog creep back in from the ocean. Max had given up trying to comfort me and was now lying in a patch of sunlight, occasionally opening one eye to check if I was okay. I wasn't. The rage had settled into something colder, something that felt like grief mixed with vindication. They hadn't changed. Not in 20 years. And somehow I'd convinced myself that maybe they had. The thing is, I'd spent 2 decades trying to understand why my parents treated me the way they did. Why Emily was always the sun and I was always the shadow. Why nothing I did, perfect grade scholarships, working 2 jobs to help with bills, ever seemed to matter. I'd run through every possibility. I wasn't pretty enough, wasn't charming enough, reminded them of some relative they disliked. I'd even wondered if I was somehow fundamentally unlovable. But I'd figured it out eventually, not through some dramatic confrontation or tearful confession. I found out the truth by accident the summer I turned 23, 3 years after I'd left home for good. I was working for Margaret, my boss at the design firm, helping her clear out storage units full of old client files. We were talking about family. She'd just lost her mother and was sorting through decades of paperwork. She mentioned finding her own baby hospital records and being surprised by details her mother had never told her. "You should look at yours sometime," she said. "It's strange seeing yourself as this tiny stranger your parents hadn't met yet." The comment stuck with me. A week later, I requested my birth records from the county, just curious. When they arrived, I requested Emily's too. I'm not even sure why. Maybe I wanted to see if there was some medical explanation for why she'd always been delicate, as our mother called it. What I found was a file 4 times thicker than mine, and in it, buried in the middle, was a hospital incident report from 1993. Emily had been 3 years old. I was 6. I remembered that time vaguely, Emily being rushed to the hospital, Mom and Dad gone for days, staying with grandmother, and being told my sister was very sick. I remembered being scared, praying in my little kid way that she'd be okay. What I didn't know, what I learned from those yellowed pages, was what the doctors had discovered. Emily had presented with mysterious symptoms: fatigue, bruising, persistent infections. The doctors ran comprehensive blood work to check for leukemia or immune disorders. And that's when they found it. Her blood type was O negative. Our mother was A positive. Our father was B positive. It was genetically impossible. The file contained the DNA test results. Not a match. Not even close. And then the hospital's internal investigation report, stamped with legal department review. Emily Chen had been accidentally switched with another infant in the hospital nursery on the day of her birth. The other family who'd moved to Singapore 6 months after the birth had been contacted. They declined to pursue any custody arrangement, stating they'd bonded with the child they'd raised and saw no benefit in disrupting 2 families. My parents had been given a choice: publicly acknowledge the switch and potentially face a custody battle, or keep quiet and raise Emily as their own. They chose to keep her. But the file contained something else: notes from a social worker who'd been assigned to check on the family 3 months after the discovery. The notes were clinical professional, but I could read between the lines. Mother had struggled to bond with Emily after learning the truth. There had been discussions about adoption placement. Grandmother, my mother's mother, who'd always been the steel spine of our family, had intervened. I never saw grandmother's exact words, but the social worker noted, "Maternal grandmother has taken strong position that keeping the child is both moral and practical necessity. She has threatened to seek custody herself if daughter proceeds with adoption plans. Family has agreed to continue raising both children." The file closed with a final note dated 6 months later. Family appears to have adjusted. Mother reports feeling more bonded with younger daughter. Recommend case closure. Adjusted. That was the word they used. Adjusted. I sat in my tiny apartment that night, those papers spread across my kitchen table, and suddenly my entire childhood made horrible, perfect sense. From the moment they'd found out Emily wasn't theirs, everything changed. I was 6, so I noticed but couldn't name it. Emily got the bigger bedroom, the one with the window seat I'd begged for. Emily got new clothes while mine came from consignment stores. When I asked why, Mom said, "Emily needs more support. You're strong, you'll be fine." By the time I was 10, the pattern was set. Emily's birthday parties were events 50 kids petting zoos magicians. Mine were cake at home with grandmother if she could make it. Emily went to private school starting in 7th grade. I stayed in public school where I studied myself half blind, trying to earn the recognition that never came. I thought if I was good enough, smart enough, helpful enough, they'd finally see me. So I got straight A's. I won academic awards. I worked part-time at 16 to help with bills when Dad's business hit rough patches. I babysat Emily when my parents went out, made her dinner, helped with her homework, even though she was in a school I could never afford to attend. And none of it mattered. Because every time Mom looked at me, she saw the truth. She was desperately trying to bury Emily wasn't hers, and I was. And I think on some level, she resented me for it. Resented that I was proof of what she was trying to forget. That she was overcompensating with Emily because she'd almost given her away, almost proven herself the kind of mother who could abandon a child just because the biology was wrong. Dad dealt with it differently. He just disappeared. Not physically, but emotionally. He'd sit at dinner saying nothing, eyes distant, while Mom fawned over Emily's B- like it was a Nobel Prize, and ignored my report card full of A's sitting right next to it. I used to think he was just weak, conflict avoidant, letting Mom run the show. But after I read that file, I understood. He couldn't handle the guilt. Couldn't bear to look at either of us too closely, because we both reminded him that he was living a lie. Emily got everything because they were trying to prove their love was real, to convince themselves they weren't the kind of people who'd almost abandoned a 3-year-old for not sharing their DNA. And I got nothing because I was the evidence of their guilt, walking around in their house, going to their schools, carrying their actual genes while being treated like the consolation prize. The easy one, Mom always called me. Low maintenance, independent. Not like Emily, she needs more attention. What she meant was, "You're my real daughter, so I can ignore you. You'll survive." But her, the one I almost threw away, I have to prove I love her. I have to make up for what I almost did. I was 23 years old, sitting alone in an apartment when I finally understood I hadn't been rejected because I was unlovable. I'd been rejected because I was too much theirs. A walking reminder of the truth they'd buried, the choice they'd made, the guilt they'd never processed. I wasn't the backup daughter. I was the practice one they didn't need anymore. Understanding why they'd treated me the way they did didn't make the years that followed any easier. If anything, it made them harder, because I kept thinking that if I just tried harder, proved myself more, maybe they'd finally see me as something other than a reminder of their guilt. I was wrong. Dead wrong. And by the time I figured that out, they'd taken everything I had. It started the summer I turned 16. Dad's construction business, which had been struggling for years, finally collapsed completely. A major client declared bankruptcy, leaving Dad with $500,000 in unpaid invoices and a dozen workers he couldn't pay. Within 3 months, we lost the office, the equipment, everything. We should have lost the house too, but grandmother paid off the mortgage. Dad never recovered from the humiliation. You'd think that kind of financial catastrophe would mean belt-tightening all around. You'd be wrong. Emily stayed in private school. 14 years old, freshman year at Westmont Academy, $30,000 a year in tuition. When I asked why she couldn't transfer to public school with me, Mom looked at me like I'd suggested we drown puppies. "She's already established there. She has friends. She's thriving. We can't disrupt her education because of temporary financial difficulties." Temporary. That word did a lot of work in our house. I was told the situation was temporary, that Dad would rebuild, that things would get better. In the meantime, we all needed to pitch in. I was 16, old enough to work, and family helped family. So I got a job bagging groceries at the supermarket near our house, 4 to 9 on weekdays, 8-hour shifts on weekends. Minimum wage, $7.25 an hour. I'd come home exhausted, finish my homework after midnight sleep 5 hours, and do it again. Every 2 weeks, I'd deposit my paycheck, and Mom would be there, hand out with that look on her face. Not quite demanding, not quite pleading. Expectant, like it was understood. I'd hand over the cash or write her a check, keeping maybe $20 for myself. Gas money, lunch money, the occasional book I needed for school. "You're investing in everyone's future," she'd say. "When Dad's business gets going again, we'll pay you back with interest. You'll see. You're being so mature about this, Margaret. So responsible." I believed her. God help me, I actually believed her. When I turned 17, I added a second job, tutoring kids in math and English, $20 an hour cash under the table. I was good at it, and the money added up fast. I started keeping the tutoring money hidden, telling myself it was for college. I'd researched schools knew I could get scholarships, but I'd still need something for housing books fees. I kept the cash in an envelope taped to the back of my desk drawer behind the built-in. Every week I'd add to it and count it before I went to sleep. $200, $500, $1,000. By the time I turned 20, I had almost $15,000 saved. 3 years of secret hoarding, of telling Mom the tutoring had dried up, of walking to work to save gas money, of eating ramen so I could add an extra 50 to the pile. It was my escape fund, my future, my proof that I could build something that was mine. Then Emily got pregnant. She was 17, a senior at Westmont. Her boyfriend David was 19, worked at his father's accounting firm. They'd been dating for 6 months. When she told Mom and Dad, I thought Dad might actually have a heart attack. Our family went to church every Sunday. We lived in a conservative suburb where people talked. An unwed, pregnant teenage daughter was the kind of scandal that followed a family forever. Mom cried for 3 days straight. Then she shifted into damage control mode. There would be a wedding, immediately, before Emily started showing. It would be beautiful, proper, no one could say the Chen family didn't do right by their daughter. David's family agreed, probably thrilled their son was marrying into a family with a big house and private school credentials, not knowing we were drowning in debt and keeping up appearances with duct tape and prayer. Mom started planning. She came to me on a Tuesday night, sat on the edge of my bed like she used to when I was little and couldn't sleep. For a moment I thought maybe this was it, the moment she'd finally see me as her daughter, and not just the responsible one. "Margaret, we need to talk about Emily's wedding." My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. "We need $15,000 for the venue, the dress, the flowers, the photographer. Everything has to be perfect or people will talk. They'll know why we rushed it." She paused, watching me. "I know you've been saving. Your father and I are so proud of how responsible you've been. We'll pay you back as soon as the business recovers. With interest. I promise." I looked at her. Really looked at her. Saw the desperation in her eyes, but also the certainty. She knew I'd say yes. Because I always said yes. Because I was the good daughter, the easy one, the one who sacrificed without complaint. "That's my college fund," I said quietly. "I've been saving for 3 years. And you'll have it back before you need it. You're only 20. You have time. Emily needs this now." Her voice cracked. "Please, Margaret, do you want your sister to be shamed? Is university more important than family honor?" I looked past her to the doorway where Dad stood, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. He wouldn't look at me, wouldn't back me up, wouldn't say a single word in my defense. Emily appeared behind him, one hand on her still flat stomach, eyes wide and glistening. She didn't say anything, just looked at me with those expectant eyes, the same look Mom had when she collected my paychecks. Like it was already decided. Like I didn't have a choice. I gave them the money. I withdrew every dollar the next morning and handed Mom a cashier's check. She hugged me, crying, telling me I was saving the family. That I was such a good sister. That Emily was so lucky to have me. The wedding was 3 weeks later. White doves released during the ceremony. A live band at the reception. Emily's dress was custom-designed imported lace, cost more than my entire year of grocery store wages. The flowers were ridiculous cascading arrangements of roses and orchids that probably died the next day. 200 guests, open bar, surf, and turf dinner. I wore a dress I'd borrowed from a coworker. Navy blue, 2 seasons out of style, but it was clean and fit okay. I wasn't in the wedding party. Emily had chosen her private school friends as bridesmaids girls I'd never met. I sat in the back of the church then at a table near the kitchen at the reception with some distant cousins I barely knew. I was eating the expensive dinner I'd paid for when I heard Mom's voice behind me talking to one of her church friends. "Emily deserves this. She's been through so much, poor thing. This pregnancy scare, the stress of senior year. But she's resilient. Takes after her father's side." A pause. "Not like Margaret. That one has no ambition. Never even applied to university. I think she's content just working at the grocery store. Some people are just meant for simple lives." I sat there, fork frozen, halfway to my mouth, hearing my mother erase 3 years of sacrifice with one casual conversation. Rewrite history so completely that my stolen college fund became my lack of ambition. My exploitation became my choice. And I understood with perfect clarity they never intended to pay me back. I was never their daughter. I was their ATM, their solution, the one who existed to make Emily's life easier. They called it borrowing. I called it theft. But I called it too late. I lasted 3 days before I broke. 3 days of coming home from my grocery store shift to see Emily's wedding photos all over the house. 3 days of Mom gushing to relatives on the phone about how beautiful everything was, how perfect, how worth every penny. 3 days of watching Dad avoid eye contact with me while Emily and David opened wedding gifts in our living room, squealing over crystal vases and KitchenAid mixers like children on Christmas morning. On the 3rd day, I found Dad in the garage pretending to organize tools he hadn't used since the business collapsed. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and asked the question I already knew the answer to. "When are you planning to pay me back?" His hands stilled on a rusted wrench. He didn't turn around. "Pay you back. The $15,000 for Emily's wedding. Mom said you'd pay me back with interest when the business picked up." He set the wrench down carefully, still not looking at me. "Well, that's the thing, Margaret. The business is still struggling. These things take time. When it picks up, we'll talk about it." "When?" I pressed. "Give me a timeline. 6 months? A year? 2 years?" "I don't know." He finally turned, and the frustration in his voice shocked me. "I don't know, okay? Things are tight. We're barely keeping our heads above water. You'll get it when we have it." "I needed it now, for college." "You're young. You have time." He turned back to his tools conversation over in his mind. "We all make sacrifices for family." I found Mom in the kitchen meal prepping dinners for Emily to take home. Apparently, pregnancy made her too tired to cook. I stood across the counter from her and asked the same question. "Mom, when am I getting my money back?" She looked up from the casserole dish, irritation flashing across her face. "Really, Margaret, we're doing this now. Your sister just got married 3 days ago." "You said it was a loan. Loans get repaid." "How can you talk about money when your sister is starting her new life? She's pregnant, she's adjusting to being a wife, and you're pestering me about money." Her voice rose with each word. "You're so selfish. Do you have any idea how much we've sacrificed for you? We raised you, fed you, clothed. You put a roof over your head for 20 years. You owe us more than $15,000. The words hit me like a physical blow. Owe them. For raising me. For doing the bare minimum that parents are supposed to do. "That was my college fund," I said, my voice shaking. 3 years of savings. You promised. We promised nothing. We asked for help and you gave it. That's what family does." She slammed the casserole dish on the counter. "Emily needs that money more than you need some fancy university degree. She has a baby coming. What do you have? A job at a grocery store. You can work anywhere. She needs stability right now." I looked past her to the living room where Emily sat on the couch, one hand on her stomach, watching us. I met her eyes. "Say something," I said. "Tell them you'll pay me back. It was supposed to be for you anyway, for your wedding. Tell them." Emily looked down at her lap. "Maggie, I have a baby coming. I can't think about money right now. David and I are just trying to get settled. Maybe in a few years when we're more stable. The maybe gutted me. Not a promise. Not even a firm plan. Just a vague maybe that we all knew would never materialize. I saw it then with perfect, horrible clarity. I was alone. I had always been alone in this family, and nothing I did would ever change that. Dad appeared in the kitchen doorway, clearly having heard everything. He put on his peacemaker face, the one he used when he wanted everyone to calm down without him actually having to take a side. "Let's all take a breath here," he said. "Margaret, you're upset, I understand. But think practically. You can live at home, save money without paying rent. Maybe help out with the baby when it comes. Emily and David could use the support." I stared at him. Help out with the baby? Well, yes. You're going to be an aunt, and you'll be here anyway. It just makes sense. The full picture crystallized. They didn't just want to keep my money, they wanted to keep me. Living at home, working my 2 jobs, handing over my paychecks, and now adding unpaid childcare to my list of responsibilities. I'd be the live-in nanny, the eternal support system, sacrificing my 20s so Emily could have help raising the child she'd conceived at 17. Mom jumped in, sensing my resistance. "Emily needs support, Margaret. You're her sister, her aunt. Family helps family. That's what we do." I looked at each of them in turn. Dad weak and conflict avoidant as always. Mom righteous in her conviction that I existed to serve Emily. Emily silent and expectant, already planning how to use me. I asked one question. Just one. "What about what I need?" Silence. Complete telling silence. They looked at each other, then at me, like I'd asked something incomprehensible. Finally, Dad spoke. "You're 20 years old, Margaret. You're healthy. You're capable. Emily has a child to think about. She needs our support right now. Stop being so self-centered." Self-centered. For asking what I needed after giving them everything. That night I waited until everyone was asleep. I pulled my old suitcase from the closet, the one I'd used for the exactly 1 overnight school trip my parents had allowed me to attend. I packed methodically. Jeans, shirts, underwear, my one good interview outfit. My birth certificate, social security card, high school diploma. My laptop, the one I'd bought myself. The few photos I had of grandmother, who died when I was 15. Her necklace, a simple gold chain with a tiny bird pendant. The only thing she'd left specifically to me in her will. I didn't take much. Most of what I owned had been chosen by my mother or handed down from Emily. I didn't want any of it. I wrote a note on notebook paper and left it on my bed. "I'm not running away. I'm choosing myself for the first time. Don't contact me." I had $487 in my wallet. Everything that was left after 4 years of working after they'd taken the rest. It was 3 a.m. when I walked out the front door, suitcase in one hand, phone in the other. I'd already looked up the bus schedule. The first bus to the coast left at 5:30. I'd been to the ocean exactly once when I was 12. Grandmother had taken me for a weekend, just the 2 of us, to a little town called Seabrook, 200 miles south. We'd walked on the beach, and she'd told me, "The ocean heals everything, Margaret. Remember that when things get hard. The ocean doesn't judge. It just takes what you give it and returns something new." I bought a one-way ticket to Seabrook. I sat in that bus station for 2 hours, terrified that someone would come looking for me, terrified that no one would. No one came. At 5:30, I boarded the bus and watched my hometown disappear through the window. I had no job waiting for me, no place to stay, no plan beyond getting as far away as possible. I was more frightened than I'd ever been in my life. I was also, for the first time I could remember, free. Because I finally understood the truth I'd been avoiding for 20 years. They didn't choose Emily over me. They never chose me at all. The bus dropped me in Seabrook at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday in late June. The town looked exactly as I remembered it from that weekend with grandmother. Small, quiet, the kind of place where tourists came in summer and locals hibernated in winter. I stood on the curb with my suitcase, breathing in salt air, and realized I had absolutely no idea what to do next. I found a diner, ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, coffee and toast, for $2, and asked the waitress if she knew of any rooms for rent. She looked me over, taking in my wrinkled clothes and desperate eyes, and scribbled an address on my receipt. Try Mrs. Kowalski. She rents the room above her laundromat. Cheap if you don't mind the noise. The room was 120 square feet above a coin laundromat that ran until midnight. The floor vibrated with every spin cycle. There was a hot plate, a mini fridge, a bathroom the size of a closet, and a window that looked out at a brick wall. Mrs. Kowalski wanted $300 a month first and last month's rent, plus a $100 deposit. I did the math in my head that left me with $87 until I found work. I'll take it, I said. I spent the next 3 days walking every street in Seabrook, filling out applications anywhere that would take them. Coffee shops, restaurants, retail stores, the grocery store. Most places took one look at my age and lack of local references and set my application in a pile I knew they'd never look at again. On the 4th day, I saw a small sign in the window of a design studio, "Receptionist wanted, inquire within." The studio was called Coastal Interiors, owned by a woman named Margaret Sullivan. Yes, Margaret. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was in her mid-50s, sharp-eyed and efficient, wearing paint-splattered jeans and silver jewelry that looked expensive. She interviewed me right there in the front room, surrounded by fabric swatches and mood boards. "You have any experience with design?" "No, ma'am, but I'm good with people and I learn fast." "Can you answer phones without sounding like you'd rather be anywhere else?" "Yes, ma'am." "It's $8 an hour, 20 hours a week to start. You'll answer phones, schedule appointments, keep the sample library organized, make coffee, and whatever else I need. You available?" I would have scrubbed toilets for $8 an hour at that point. "Yes, ma'am." "Stop calling me ma'am. It's Margaret. You start Monday." I lived on instant noodles and day-old bread from the bakery that sold discount bags at closing time. I walked everywhere because bus fare was $2 each way, and I couldn't afford it. I bought a used mattress from a thrift store for $30 and slept on it on the floor because I couldn't afford a bed frame. I owned 2 plates, 1 pot, 3 forks, and a knife I'd taken from the diner when the waitress wasn't looking. But every 2 weeks when I got my paycheck, every single dollar was mine. Nobody took it. Nobody expected it. Nobody made me feel guilty for keeping it. I'd deposit it at the bank, keep $40 for expenses, and watch the number in my account slowly, painfully climb. $75, $120, $200. It was the most money I'd ever had that was truly mine. 3 months in, I found Max. I was walking home from work on a Friday evening when I heard whimpering behind the dumpster outside the Chinese restaurant. He was maybe 6 months old, some kind of golden retriever mix so thin I could count his ribs. His fur was matted and he had a gash on his front leg that looked infected. I should have walked away. I could barely feed myself. But I looked at him and saw myself abandoned, starving, trying to survive on scraps. I took him to the emergency vet, which cost me $160 I didn't have. I put it on the credit card I'd opened for emergencies, knowing I'd be paying it off for months. The vet cleaned him up, gave him shots, and told me he'd probably been dumped by someone who didn't want to deal with a puppy anymore. "He's a good dog," she said. "He just needs someone to take care of him." Mrs. Kowalski didn't allow pets. I smuggled Max upstairs in my jacket and kept him quiet with bits of my dinner. We slept on that mattress on the floor together, 2 strays who'd found each other. Some nights I cried into his fur, overwhelmed by loneliness and fear that I'd made a terrible mistake leaving home. Other nights I'd lie awake listening to the laundromat machines and feel something I'd never felt before, lightness, like I could breathe fully for the first time. Margaret noticed my interest in the design work after I'd been there about 6 months. She'd catch me studying the fabric samples during my lunch break, or flipping through her design books when I thought she wasn't looking. One evening, when I was the last one there, she found me sketching a room layout on scrap paper, trying to figure out how she'd solved a particularly tricky furniture arrangement for a client. "You're interested in this," she said. Not a question. I looked up, embarrassed. I'm sorry I wasn't. Don't apologize. Are you interested or not? Yes? I admitted. She pulled up a chair. I can't pay you more. Budget's tight, but I can teach you if you want to learn. You'd have to put in extra hours unpaid, and I'm not an easy teacher. But if you're serious about this, I'll show you how it's done. I was serious. God, I was serious. For the next 2 years, I became Margaret's shadow. I stayed late every night studying her design books from the library, learning to read floor plans, understanding color theory, and spatial relationships. She was tough, demanding, corrected me constantly, but she was fair. She saw something in me, potential maybe, or just raw hunger to be good at something. She never asked me to sacrifice that potential for someone else's benefit. She just taught me. It was the first time in my life someone had invested in me without expecting me to pay them back by making myself smaller. By the time I turned 23, Margaret was letting me sit in on client consultations. I took notes, learned how to listen to what clients said they wanted versus what they actually needed, how to guide them without pushing. And then one day she handed me a file. The Harrisons, older couple retiring, want to redesign their home to age in place. Small budget. Think you can handle it. My first solo project. I was terrified. I met Robert and Susan Harrison at their small ranch house on the east side of town. They were in their early 60s, sweet and unpretentious and worried about money. They showed me what they had to work with $12,000 they'd saved carefully, knowing it wasn't much. I could have charged my standard rate small as it was, but I looked at them and saw people trying to build something good with limited resources, and I couldn't do it. I charged them for materials and permits, barely anything for my time. I poured everything I'd learned into that house, reconfigured the bathroom for accessibility, opened up the kitchen, brought in light through strategic mirror placement and paint choices that made the small space feel twice its size. When it was finished, Susan Harrison walked through and cried. Not sad tears, joy. It's perfect, she kept saying. It's exactly what we needed. Robert shook my hand at the door. You barely charged us anything. This is worth 3 times what we paid. You gave me what you had. That's enough. Someday, he said, serious now, when we can, we'll repay this kindness. I smiled. Kindness doesn't need repayment, Mr. Harrison. Just enjoy your home. I walked back to my apartment that night, past the laundromat I'd finally moved out of, into a slightly bigger studio, and felt something close to pride. I was 23 years old. I was sleeping on a real bed frame now. I had a dog who loved me. I had a skill I was good at. I had a mentor who believed in me. For the first time, I was poor. And for the first time, I was free. The Harrisons sent me my first referral 3 months after I finished their house. Their neighbor had seen the transformation and wanted the same magic for her dated kitchen. That client referred 2 more. Those 2 referred others. Within a year of that first solo project, I had more work than I could handle working part-time at Margaret's studio. She noticed, of course. Margaret noticed everything. You're ready, she said one afternoon, watching me juggle phone calls from 3 different potential clients. You should go out on your own. The thought terrified me. I don't have the capital to start a business. You don't need much. You work from home, meet clients at their houses. You already have a portfolio. What you need is courage. She looked at me over her reading glasses. I had it once when I was your age. Now I'm tired and ready to slow down. You're not. Stop playing it safe. I was 26 when I registered Chen Interiors as an LLC. I worked from my studio apartment with Max as my only employee, meeting clients at coffee shops or their homes. My overhead was almost nothing. Just liability insurance, a website, and business cards. I took every job that came my way, big or small, and approached each one like it was the most important project in the world. Because I remembered what it felt like to be invisible, I made sure every client felt seen. I listened to the things they didn't say. The widow who wanted to erase her husband's presence without admitting it, the couple whose clashing styles reflected deeper relationship issues, the single mother who needed her home to feel like a sanctuary from the chaos of raising kids alone. Design wasn't about furniture and paint colors. It was about helping people build spaces where they could breathe. Word spread. The designer who understood. The one who worked miracles on impossible budgets. The one who made you feel like your home mattered. By the time I was 30, I'd been featured in Coastal Living and 2 regional design magazines. I wasn't getting rich. Most of my clients were normal people, not wealthy second homeowners, but I was stable. More than stable. I was thriving. I still saved obsessively. Couldn't help it. Some trauma stays in your bones. I'd lie awake calculating how long I could survive if work dried up, kept 3 months of expenses in liquid savings, refused to buy anything I couldn't afford twice. The fear of being broke again, of being dependent on anyone, never quite left me. But I built something that was mine, a business with my name on it, a reputation that had nothing to do with my family or where I came from. Clients hired me because I was good, not because they felt sorry for me or expected me to work for free. My philosophy became my brand. Design isn't about impressing others. It's about coming home to yourself. I put it on my website, my business cards, everywhere. Because it was true. Every space I created was designed to make the people living there feel like they could finally exhale. I found the villa in early 2020, right before the world shut down. I'd been looking casually for years, browsing real estate listings the way some people browse vacation rentals, dreaming without seriously intending to buy. Then I saw it. A 1920s coastal villa, original architecture mostly intact, sitting on a half-acre lot with direct ocean views. It had been a vacation rental for years, then sat empty for 2 more while the elderly owner lived in assisted living. It was a disaster. Peeling paint water damage outdated everything, a roof that probably needed replacing. The listing called it a fixer-upper with potential. I called it perfect. The asking price was absurd, $480,000 for a house that needed another $100,000 in work. But I went to see it anyway, and the moment I walked through that front door, I was gone. The bones were beautiful. High ceilings, original hardwood under the terrible carpet windows that flooded every room with light. The view from the master bedroom took my breath away, nothing but ocean and sky. The same view I'd stared at with grandmother when I was 12, and she told me the ocean could heal anything. I could see exactly what it could be, what it needed to be. I offered $350. They countered at $420. We settled at $400,000 even. I emptied my savings for the down payment, took out a mortgage for the rest, and spent the next year renovating it myself. I hired contractors for the roof, the plumbing, the electrical, but everything else I did with my own hands. I stripped wallpaper at midnight. I sanded floors until my arms ached. I painted every wall, installed every light fixture, chose every tile. I designed it as the opposite of every house I'd grown up in. Where my childhood home had been dark and cluttered, full of my mother's anxious collecting, the villa was open and light. Minimal furniture, clean lines, neutral colors with subtle warmth. Where my childhood home had felt like a stage for performing the right version of family, the villa felt like exhaling. No pretense, no performance. Just space to exist. I moved in on my 34th birthday with Max, a bottle of wine, and a profound sense of accomplishment. This was mine, every square inch of it. Nobody had given it to me. Nobody could take it away. For 5 years, I lived the quietest, most peaceful existence I'd ever known. My morning routine became sacred coffee on the deck, watching sunrise, Max at my feet, the sound of waves replacing the anxious chatter that had filled my childhood. I worked from my home office, meeting with clients via video call or at their properties. I designed spaces that helped other people find their own version of peace. I dated occasionally, met men through work, through friends I'd made in Seabrook, through dating apps when I felt lonely enough. None of them stuck. Not because they weren't good men, but because I'd learned something important: being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. I preferred my own company to the compromise of sharing space with someone who didn't understand why I needed things exactly the way I needed them. The villa became semi-famous in design circles. Clients would ask to see it before hiring me, wanting to understand my aesthetic. I'd walk them through, watching their faces soften as they moved from room to room, and I'd know I'd get the job. Because they could feel what I'd built here, not just beautiful design, but sanctuary. I thought I'd finally outrun everything. The family that had used me. The childhood that had broken me. The girl who'd arrived in Seabrook with $487 and no plan. I thought I'd built something they could never touch, a life so far removed from theirs that I was finally completely safe. I was wrong. Because on a foggy Tuesday morning in late April, while I was feeding stray cats in my garden and thinking about absolutely nothing more complicated than whether to use sea glass blue or sage green in a client's bathroom, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and my mother's voice came through after 20 years of silence, not to apologize or reconnect, but to inform me that my sanctuary was about to become Emily's solution. I thought I bought peace. Turns out I bought the stage for my reckoning. I didn't sleep that night, but I wasn't lying awake crying or panicking. I was thinking, planning, running scenarios the way I'd learned to run design concepts, testing them from every angle, looking for weaknesses, finding the elegant solution that solved multiple problems at once. Emily had lost her home. That much was clear from the desperation in my mother's voice, the entitlement that masked fear. David's accounting business must have failed, or maybe they'd been living beyond their means for years, and it finally caught up with them. My parents were too proud to let Emily move back into their house, too invested in the image of her success to let the community see her fall. So they'd looked around for a solution and landed on me. Of course they had. In their minds, I owed them. I'd taken their money, their support, their years of raising me, and given nothing back except ingratitude and abandonment. Never mind that they'd stolen my college fund. Never mind that they'd expected me to work myself to exhaustion while Emily got everything handed to her. In the narrative they'd constructed over 20 years, I was the selfish one, the one who'd walked away from family. And now I had this big, beautiful villa space I didn't need, luxury I didn't deserve, while Emily, their golden child, was suffering. If I refused outright, I'd be the villain, the cruel sister who had plenty and shared nothing. They'd tell everyone, paint themselves as the victims of my cold heart, and Emily would get to play the martyr once again. If I agreed and let them move in, I'd lose everything I'd built. My sanctuary would become theirs. They'd take over, make demands, expect me to accommodate their needs, while my own became invisible. Again. I'd be 20 years old again, handing over my paycheck, watching them take and take while giving nothing back. But sitting there in the dark, listening to the ocean, I realized something: I wasn't 20 anymore. I had resources they didn't know about, skills they'd never bothered to learn. And I understood something about families like mine, that they'd never figured out: the best revenge isn't punishment. It's protection. Protecting the next generation from repeating the same cycles. Sophie, Emily's daughter, 14 years old. I'd never met her, didn't even know what she looked like. But I knew what it was like to be a child in a family that valued performance over truth, that used people instead of loving them. And if Emily and David had truly lost everything, Sophie was about to learn those lessons the hard way, unless someone protected her first. By dawn, I had a plan. I made coffee, fed Max, and at exactly 8 o'clock, I called the Harrisons. Susan answered on the third ring. Maggie. What a lovely surprise. Robert, it's Maggie. I heard him in the background, his voice warm. Tell her we were just talking about her. The Jeffersons next door want to consult. Actually, I said, I need to talk to you both about something. Do you have time this morning? The warmth in Susan's voice shifted to concern. Of course, dear. Is everything all right? I need some help. The legal kind. They invited me over immediately. I drove to their house, the one I'd redesigned 13 years ago, and found it exactly as I'd left it, well-maintained, loved, every design choice still working perfectly. Susan had baked scones. Robert made tea. We sat in their sunlit kitchen and I told them everything. Not just about the phone call, but about my family. The favoritism. The stolen money. The 20 years of silence. Emily's situation now. My mother's demand. the impossible position they'd put me in. Susan reached across the table and took my hand halfway through. Robert listened with the focused attention of someone who'd run a successful business for 40 years and knew manipulation when he heard it. When I finished, Susan said simply, "Tell us what you need, dear." I laid out my plan: a trust fund with the villa as the primary asset, Sophie as the sole beneficiary, the Harrisons as trustees managing the property until Sophie turned 25, me as the guardian responsible for maintenance and oversight, legal, ironclad, structured to protect Sophie's interests above everyone else's. If they move into a house that belongs to Sophie, they're living in their daughter's property, not mine. They can't claim I'm being generous or cruel. I'm simply protecting my niece's future. And when they inevitably try to take advantage, they won't be exploiting me. They'll be exploiting their own child. Robert leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. But it requires you two to serve as trustees, to hold the legal authority, to be willing to enforce the terms if they violate them. I looked between them. It's asking a lot. You charged us almost nothing for a project worth $30,000, Susan said firmly. You gave us a home we could retire in with dignity. We've been looking for a way to repay that kindness for 13 years. This isn't repayment, I said. This is asking you to get involved in my family drama. Robert shook his head. No, this is protecting a child from people who use family as a weapon. We're in. We spent the next 2 days with Robert's attorney, a sharp woman in her 60s, who understood exactly what we were building. The trust was airtight. Sophie Chen, age 14, sole beneficiary. Property transfers to her name at age 25 or earlier if she becomes legally emancipated. The Harrisons as co-trustees with full legal authority to manage rent or sell the property in Sophie's best interest. Me as guardian responsible for physical maintenance and financial oversight but with no ownership stake. Anyone living in the property without a formal rental agreement approved by the trustees would be legally classified as guests of the guardian with no tenant rights and no claim to the property. It was perfect, a legal maze designed to look like generosity while actually being a trap. On the third day, I called my mother back. She answered immediately, voice eager. "Margaret, have you made a decision?" I kept my voice carefully neutral, calm, reasonable. "I've thought about it. They can stay temporarily while they get back on their feet. I know how hard it is to lose a home." Silence. Then, well, I have to say I'm surprised. I thought you'd fight me on this. Why would I fight you? Emily's family needs help. I have space. I paused, let the next part land softly. I have been making some arrangements, though, for Sophie's future. I've put the house in her name, set up a trust fund. She's the beneficiary. I'm just the guardian until she's 25. You did what? I established a trust for my niece. The villa is her inheritance now. I want to make sure she's always taken care of no matter what happens with David's business or Emily's situation. This way she'll always have security. I could almost hear my mother's brain working, trying to find the catch, not quite seeing it. That's very generous of you, Margaret. Family helps family, right? That's what you always taught me. I let the words sit there, sweet and poisonous. I'll have my attorney send over the paperwork. Emily and David can move in next month. I'll stay in a rental nearby to handle property maintenance. It'll all be very smooth. Well, Mother sounded off balance, like she'd braced for a fight that never came. I'm glad you're finally being reasonable about this. Emily will be so relieved. I'm sure she will be. I'll be in touch. I hung up before she could say anything else. Max looked up at me from his bedtail, wagging slowly, sensing the shift in my energy. I knelt down and buried my face in his fur. And for the first time since that phone call 3 days ago, I smiled. They thought I was giving up the house, surrendering, letting them win again. They had no idea what they were walking into, because I wasn't giving them my house. I was giving them a mirror, a chance to see exactly who they were when they thought no one was watching. and this time there would be a witness who mattered. A 14-year-old girl who deserved better than the family she'd been born into. They thought I was giving up the house. I was giving them a mirror. They arrived on a Saturday morning in early May with a U-Haul truck and an attitude of triumph. I watched from my car parked down the street as the truck pulled into the driveway. My driveway, though, not for much longer in any way that mattered. Emily got out first, wearing expensive sunglasses and a linen dress that looked designer. She'd gained a little weight over the years, but carried it well. Still pretty, still performing. Mother emerged from the passenger seat, directing traffic before her feet even hit the ground. Father climbed out of the back, looking older and grayer than I remembered, shoulders hunched in that permanent posture of defeat I recognized from my childhood. And then a girl stepped out, tall and gangly in that teenage way, dark hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Sophie, my niece. A stranger who apparently now owned my house. I waited 15 minutes, giving them time to do the initial walkthrough before I pulled into the driveway behind the truck. Emily turned at the sound of my engine, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Not quite guilt, more like calculation. Then she smiled the same bright smile she'd used at her wedding when I'd sat in the back in a borrowed dress. Maggie, oh my God, you look exactly the same. I got out of the car slowly, Max jumping down beside me. Hello, Emily. She moved forward like she might hug me, then seemed to think better of it when I didn't reciprocate. This is so generous of you. Really, we're in such a tough spot right now, and this just... it means everything. I'm glad I could help, I said, meaning none of it. Mother appeared on the porch, hands on hips, surveying the property like a general assessing conquered territory. Margaret, the movers are asking where things should go. I assume you've cleared out your personal items. Most of them. I'll get the rest this week. Well, don't take too long. We need to settle in. She turned back toward the house, already dismissing me. Emily gestured toward the villa, and I noticed she didn't wait for permission before critiquing. We'll need to change these curtains immediately. They're so, I don't know, bland. And this couch is way too modern. It doesn't work with the architecture at all. The guest room is tiny. I don't know how Sophie's supposed to fit all her things in there. I watched her catalog everything wrong with the house I'd spent a year of my life restoring, the house I'd designed as my sanctuary, and felt nothing. I'd already mourned this place. What I felt now was curiosity, like watching a science experiment unfold exactly as predicted. Father stood by the truck, avoiding my eyes as always. He looked diminished, somehow smaller than I remembered. When our eyes finally met, he glanced away immediately, and I wondered if he felt any shame at all, or if that required a capacity for self-reflection he'd never developed. Here are the keys, I said, holding them out to Emily. Make yourselves comfortable. Mi casa es su casa. Emily took them without catching the irony. Of course she didn't. To catch irony, you'd have to be paying attention to someone other than yourself. Sophie hung back by the truck, watching everything with quiet, dark eyes. She was the only one who seemed uncomfortable with this whole arrangement. When I looked at her, she managed a small, awkward smile and stepped forward. Thank you, Aunt Maggie, she said quietly, for letting us stay here. Her voice was softer than I expected, genuine, the first real words anyone had spoken to me since I'd arrived. You're welcome, Sophie, I said, and I meant that one. Emily reached out and pulled Sophie back toward the house. Come on, honey, let's get you settled. You can pick which room you want. Sophie glanced back at me once before disappearing inside. Over the next week, I watched from a distance as they transformed my villa into something unrecognizable. I'd rented a small furnished apartment 3 blocks away, close enough to monitor the property, as guardian far enough to maintain my sanity. Every day I'd drive by and see new changes. The minimalist artwork I'd chosen so carefully removed, replaced with busy floral prints and inspirational quotes in curly fonts. The soft, neutral walls I'd painted myself, covered with bold teals and coral colors that clashed with the natural light I'd worked so hard to maximize. Emily documented everything on Facebook. I didn't follow her, but mutual acquaintances sent me screenshots thinking I'd want to see. New chapter, grateful for family who support us in hard times, she'd written with photos of the villa's living room now crammed with oversized furniture and throw pillows in clashing patterns. The comments flooded in. Your sister is so generous. What a blessing to have family. So happy for you. Emily replied to each one. She finally understands what family means, with a heart emoji. I sat in my rental apartment, Max's head on my lap, and read those words without feeling anything at all. Let her perform. Let her believe she'd won. The truth would catch up eventually. The furniture I'd refinished by hand, a vintage sideboard I'd stripped and restained over 3 weekends, a mid-century credenza I'd rescued from an estate sale, disappeared. I found out later they'd hauled it to Goodwill, dismissing it as old junk that didn't fit the aesthetic. Mother supervised the purge, walking through rooms and declaring what stayed and what went. It needs a woman's touch. I heard her tell Emily when I stopped by to collect some books I'd left behind. It was too cold before, too much like a hotel. Now it feels like a real home. They were erasing me. Every choice I'd made, every careful detail, every piece of myself I'd poured into that house gone. Painted over, thrown out, replaced with their version of what a home should be. In their minds, they were improving it, making it warm, lived-in, family-friendly. They didn't understand that they were destroying something that had taken years to build. Or maybe they did understand, and that was the point. I came by one afternoon to retrieve the last of my personal items. Some files from my office, a few design books, a lamp that had belonged to grandmother. Sophie answered the door, and I saw immediately that she looked embarrassed. Hi, Aunt Maggie. Mom said you were coming by. I'm sorry about all the changes. She says you don't mind. I looked at this girl, nearly as tall as me, with Emily's features, but something different in her eyes. An awareness. A discomfort with the narrative she'd been handed. Did your mom ask me? I said gently. Sophie looked down. No. Then how does she know I don't mind? A long pause. I could see her processing this, turning it over in her mind. I don't know, she finally said. I stepped inside, moving past her toward my old office. She followed me, hovering in the doorway while I gathered my things. Sophie, I said, not looking at her, this house is legally yours now. Did anyone tell you that? Her eyes went wide. What? The villa. It's in your name. A trust fund. You're the owner. I'm just the guardian until you turn 25. No one told me that. She looked around, like seeing the house differently. Mom said you were letting us stay here temporarily, that you were being generous. I am being generous. To you. Because this is your inheritance. I could see her trying to make sense of it, trying to reconcile what I was saying with what she'd been told. Before she could ask more questions, Emily's voice rang out from upstairs. Sophie, come help me with these boxes. Sophie glanced toward the stairs, then back at me. It's okay. Go ahead. She hesitated one more moment, then turned and headed upstairs. I finished collecting my things and let myself out quietly. That evening I sat on the small balcony of my rental with Max, watching the sunset over the ocean. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Sophie. Mom gave me your number. Can we talk sometime? I saved her contact and replied, anytime you want. Down the street in the villa that was no longer mine but also no longer theirs, I imagined Emily celebrating her victory, posting more photos, telling David, we finally won. She finally gave us what we deserved. Winners don't usually need to convince themselves, I thought. But she'd been performing her whole life. Why stop now? Sophie's text sat in my phone like a promise. I didn't push. 14-year-olds needed to come to things in their own time, especially when those things involved seeing their family clearly for the first time. So I went about my work, met with clients, and every few days I'd drive to the villa early in the morning to maintain the garden. It was my legal right as guardian of the property. More than that, it was my responsibility to ensure the asset appreciated for the beneficiary. The garden had always been my favorite part of the villa. I'd planted every flower chosen, every shrub, for how it would look in 5 years, 10 years. I wasn't about to let it die just because I didn't live there anymore. I was there on a Wednesday morning just after 7, deadheading roses and pulling weeds from the bed near the front walk. Max lay in a patch of sunlight, watching me work with half-closed eyes. The house was quiet. I assumed everyone was still asleep. Then I heard footsteps on the gravel path. Sophie appeared around the corner barefoot, wearing pajama pants and an oversized sweatshirt. Her hair was messy, like she'd just woken up. She stopped when she saw me, seemed to consider turning back, then walked forward instead. "Why are you doing yard work here if you don't live here anymore?" she asked. I sat back on my heels, pulling off my gardening gloves. "The trust requires property maintenance. I'm ensuring the asset appreciates for the beneficiary." She blinked. "The what?" I gestured to the porch steps. "Want to sit?" She settled on the top step, pulling her knees up to her chest. I stayed in the garden bed, giving her space, letting her control the distance between us. "This house is yours, Sophie. It's in your name. The villa, the land, everything. It's held in a trust fund with you as the sole beneficiary. When you turn 25, you'll own it outright. Until then, the Harrisons are the trustees and I'm the guardian. I'm just taking care of it for you." She stared at me. "But Mom said you were letting us stay here, that you were being generous because we lost our house." "I am being generous. To you. This is your inheritance." I pulled another weed, kept my voice neutral. "Your mom is living in your house. I didn't give it to her. I protected it for you." I could see her mind working, trying to reconcile what I was saying with whatever story she'd been told. "Mom said—" She trailed off, realization dawning across her face. "She didn't tell me it was mine." "No," I agreed. "She didn't." Sophie sat there for a long moment, staring at the house like she'd never seen it before. Then she stood abruptly. "I have to go." She disappeared back inside, and I returned to my weeding, wondering if I'd said too much too soon. But I'd learned long ago that the truth had its own timeline. You couldn't force someone to see what they weren't ready to see. Over the next week, I noticed Sophie watching me when I came by. She'd appear at windows on the porch, always observing. I didn't approach her. Just did my work and let her process. What I didn't know was what she was hearing inside that house. Later, she'd tell me about the conversations. How she'd been getting juice from the kitchen one morning when she heard her mother and grandmother talking in the living room, voices low, but not quite low enough. She'd frozen in the hallway listening. She was always weird living alone with just a dog, Emily had said. Mother's laugh sharp and unkind. At least she's finally useful, though I'm surprised she gave in so easily. "Do you think she suspects we're not planning to leave?" More laughter. Then her father's voice, quiet like always. "This doesn't feel right." Mother's response cutting through. "Don't start, Robert. Emily needs this. We all need this. Margaret has more than enough. She can afford to share." Sophie had stood in that hallway 14 years old, hearing her family talk about her aunt like she was a resource to be exploited rather than a person. She'd pulled out her phone and hit record, not really knowing why. Not for evidence. Just to prove to herself later that she hadn't imagined it. Over the next few days, she recorded more. Her mother on the phone with a friend. "Oh, Maggie's fine with it. She knows family comes first." Her grandmother sorting through my belongings I'd left in storage. "She won't miss this. She probably forgot she even had it." Her father saying nothing, as always, just existing in the spaces between their certainty. The picture that emerged was clear and cruel. They'd planned this. They'd assumed I'd fold because I always had. They were using me, and they thought it was not only justified, but funny. Sophie was smart enough to know what that meant about her family. Smart enough to be disturbed by it. A week after our first conversation, I was back in the garden early on a Saturday morning. The stray cats had gathered for breakfast. There were 5 now, including a new tortoiseshell I'd started calling Painter because of her splotchy coat. I was filling their bowls when I heard footsteps again. Sophie sat down next to me on the ground without asking, cross-legged in the grass. We stayed quiet for a long time watching the cats eat. Max wandered over and put his head in her lap. She scratched his ears absently. Finally, she spoke. "Grandma says you're bad. That you abandoned the family 20 years ago, and now you're trying to control us by dangling this house." I kept my eyes on the cats. Waited. "She says you were always selfish, that you never cared about anyone but yourself." I turned to look at her then. "What do you think?" Sophie met my eyes. She had Emily's features, but something entirely different behind them. A capacity for honesty her mother had never developed. "Bad people don't feed stray cats like you do," she said slowly. "Bad people don't plant flowers in a garden they'll never see bloom. Bad people don't give away their house to their niece instead of selling it." She pulled up a handful of grass, let it fall through her fingers. "I think Grandma is scared of you." The observation was so unexpected, so perceptive, I almost laughed. "Why would she be scared of me?" "Because you left, and you were okay." She looked at me directly. "That means she was wrong about you. Wrong about what you needed from them. Wrong about whether you'd survive without them." A pause. "If she was wrong about you, she might be wrong about other things too." I felt something shift in my chest. Hope, maybe. Or recognition. This girl understood things her mother never would. "I've been recording them," Sophie said quietly. "The things they say about you when they think I'm not listening. I have 6 hours of conversations on my phone now." "Why?" She shrugged, uncomfortable. "At first I thought maybe I was being paranoid, that I was misunderstanding. But I listened back and they laugh about it, about using you, like it's a game they won." She looked at me. "That's not what family is supposed to be, is it?" "No," I said. "It's not. I don't know what to do with the recordings. I just wanted proof I wasn't crazy." She pulled out her phone, scrolled through files. "Listen to this one." She hit play. Emily's voice came through bright and cheerful. "Margaret's such a pushover. I told David we could stay here for years and she wouldn't do anything about it. She's too scared of confrontation." Mother's laugh. "She always was easy to manage." Sophie stopped the recording. "There's more. Hours of it. They talk about you like you're not even a person." I looked at this 14-year-old girl sitting in the grass of her own property that she didn't even know she owned until a week ago, holding evidence of her family's cruelty on a device she barely knew how to use, and I saw myself at her age. Trying to make sense of why the people who were supposed to love you treated you like you were disposable. "Sophie," I said carefully, "you didn't imagine it. And you're not crazy. What you heard is real." "I know," she whispered. "That's the scary part." We sat there together while the sun climbed higher and the cats finished eating and scattered. Max stayed between us, a warm, solid presence that asked nothing and gave everything. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie said finally. "Why did you really put the house in my name?" I thought about lying or softening the truth, but this girl deserved honesty. Because I remembered what it's like to be used by people who are supposed to protect you. And I thought maybe I could protect you instead. She nodded slowly, processing. Then, "Thank you." "You're welcome." She stood, brushed grass off her pajama pants, started to walk away. Then she turned back. "Lies sound different when you're 14, she said. "They sound like betrayal." I watched her walk back into the house, and for the first time since my mother's phone call, I smiled. Sophie's words stayed with me for days. Lies sound different when you're 14. They sound like betrayal. I wondered what lies sounded like at 38, after you'd spent 2 decades thinking you knew the full scope of what had been done to you. I was about to find out. My rental apartment came with a small storage unit in the basement, and I'd been slowly going through boxes I'd kept in paid storage for years trying to consolidate and save money. Most of it was junk I should have thrown out long ago. Old design magazines, college textbooks from the degree I never finished, files from my early freelance work. But there were also boxes I'd never opened, boxes that had arrived in the mail 7 years after I'd left home. Mother had sent them after grandmother died. No note, no explanation. Just 3 boxes of miscellaneous items from grandmother's house. Things that had apparently been left to me, though I'd never seen a will. I'd shoved them in storage unopened because looking through grandmother's belongings felt like opening a wound I'd finally managed to close. Grandmother had been the only person in that family who'd seen me, and she'd died when I was 15, leaving me alone with people who treated me like furniture. But now I was looking for grandmother's necklace, the one piece of her I'd kept close, and I couldn't find it anywhere in my apartment. I thought maybe I'd packed it by accident when I moved out of the villa. So I went down to the storage unit and started going through those old boxes, the ones I'd been avoiding for years. The first box was photos and books. The second was kitchenware and linens. The third at the very bottom was papers. Old bills, recipes written in grandmother's shaky handwriting, Christmas cards I'd sent her as a child. And underneath everything, a manila folder marked in grandmother's hand, "Important, Margaret's papers." My name. She'd named me after herself, something Mother had never mentioned, and I'd only discovered when I saw my birth certificate for the first time at 18. I opened the folder. On top was a life insurance policy from American Heritage Life dated 1999. I'd been 12 years old. The document was crisp and official with grandmother's information filled out in careful block letters. Coverage, amount $200,000. Beneficiary, Margaret Alice Chen, granddaughter DOB, 0415, 1987. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to understand why I'd never known about this. Grandmother died in 2004 when I was 17. Surely, if there was life insurance, someone would have told me. Surely, I would have received something. Clipped to the policy was another document. A claim form dated 3 months after grandmother's death. All the information filled out correctly, policy number, date of death, cause of death. And at the bottom, a signature line for the beneficiary to acknowledge receipt of funds. The signature read, Margaret A. Chen, in flowing cursive. I looked at that signature for a full minute before my brain caught up with what I was seeing. That wasn't my handwriting. At 17, I barely wrote in cursive. I printed everything had since middle school. My signature then had been an awkward scrawl, my first initial and last name printed in uneven letters, because I'd never bothered to develop a proper signature. This signature was practiced confident adult. Someone had signed my name. Someone had claimed $200,000 in my name, and I'd never seen a penny of it. My hands started shaking. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything, then called the insurance company. The customer service rep was polite, but confused when I explained I was calling about a policy from 1999, a claim from 2004. I need to speak to someone in your records department. This is about a fraudulent claim. They transferred me 3 times before I got someone who could help. A man named Richard who sounded like he'd been doing this job for decades and had heard everything. I have the policy number, I said, reading it off. The beneficiary was Margaret Alice Chen. That's me. But I never received the payout. I heard typing. A long pause. Ma'am, our records show the claim was processed and paid out in full on August 15, 2004. Check number 847392 deposited to account ending in 4782. What bank? More typing. First National Branch in. Looks like the claim was filed by the beneficiary at the branch location. We have a signature on file. Can you tell me what account the check was deposited into? I'm sorry we don't have access to banking records, just that it was cashed. But there's a copy of the beneficiary's ID on file that was submitted with the claim. Would you like me to email you these documents? Yes, please. The email arrived 10 minutes later. I opened it on my phone, and there it was, a scanned copy of my driver's license from 2004. My 17-year-old face awkward and serious. Except I'd never submitted this to an insurance company. I'd never filed a claim. I'd never even known the policy existed. Someone had taken my ID, forged my signature, and stolen $200,000 that my grandmother had left to protect me. I didn't need to guess who. There was only one person who would have had access to both grandmother's papers and my identification. Only one person who would have known about the policy and had the motivation to steal it. I sat there in that basement storage unit surrounded by boxes of a dead woman's belongings and did the math. $200,000 in 2004. If it had been invested conservatively, even just sitting in a basic index fund averaging 5% annual returns, it would be worth close to $500,000 today. My villa had cost $480,000. Every penny I'd saved, every sacrifice I'd made, every year of eating ramen and walking to work to save bus fare, I'd done it while my mother sat on a fortune that was supposed to be mine. The money grandmother had left specifically to give me a future to protect me from the family she saw was failing. Me had been stolen before I was old enough to even know it existed. I'd thought I built my success from nothing, that I'd escaped poverty through determination and hard work. And I had worked hard, impossibly hard. But I hadn't started from nothing. I'd started from negative $200,000 because my mother had robbed me before I even knew I'd been named in a will. Grandmother had tried to save me. Had set aside money, had made me the beneficiary, had probably done it specifically because she knew what my parents were like. She'd seen them stealing from me my whole childhood, seen them sacrificing me for Emily, and she'd tried to give me a way out. And my mother had stolen it. I thought about every moment I'd struggled in Seabrook, the nights I'd cried from exhaustion and fear, the times I'd chosen between food and rent, the years of sleeping on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford a bed frame. The terror of being broke and alone at 20 years old with less than $500 to my name. I could have had $200,000. I could have gone to college, could have started my business years earlier with actual capital, could have bought a house, built security, had choices instead of just survival. My mother had looked at that insurance policy, looked at her 17-year-old daughter who was already working 2 jobs to support the family, and decided that money belonged to her instead. I gathered all the papers, shoved them back in the folder, and walked to my car in a daze. I sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, and something broke open inside my chest. A sound came out of me that I didn't recognize, raw and animal. I screamed until my throat hurt, pounded my fists against the steering wheel until my hands ached. Max, who'd been waiting patiently in the back seat, whined and put his paw on my shoulder. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, the rage burned itself into something colder, clearer. I pulled out my phone and called my attorney, the same one who'd helped me set up the trust. I need to file a civil suit, I said when she answered. Fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. I have all the documentation. How soon can we move? How soon do you want to move in? Yesterday. She paused. Want to tell me what happened? I looked down at the folder in my lap, at grandmother's careful handwriting on the tab. The house I built, I said. It was stolen before I even knew I owned it. The lawsuit took 3 weeks to prepare properly. My attorney wanted every document verified, every signature authenticated, every piece of evidence ironclad before we filed. 3 weeks of gathering bank records, insurance company statements, forensic handwriting analysis. 3 weeks of building a case that would be impossible to dismiss or deflect. 3 weeks was also exactly how long I'd planned to let Emily's family settle into the villa. Long enough for them to feel secure. Long enough for them to stop performing gratitude and start showing their true colors. Long enough for them to make unauthorized changes to a property they didn't own and forget that someone was watching. The Harrisons and I had coordinated the timing down to the day. They'd arrive for their first quarterly trustee inspection exactly 3 weeks after Emily moved in on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. Mid-morning when everyone would be home and awake but not expecting visitors. When Emily would be annoyed at the interruption of whatever she was doing. When my mother would be there to witness her careful plans unravel in real time. I wasn't there when they knocked on the door. I'd positioned myself at a coffee shop 2 blocks away, laptop open, pretending to work on a client proposal while my phone sat face up on the table. Waiting. Susan had texted me when they left their house. "On our way. Robert has the camera and all the paperwork. This is going to be interesting." I'd replied with a simple thumbs up, then ordered another coffee I didn't need and tried to focus on anything other than the clock. At 10:03, my phone buzzed. A text from Susan. She answered the door. "Starting now." I imagined it playing out exactly as we'd planned. The Harrisons standing on the porch in their neat, respectable clothes, Robert holding his leather document folder, Susan with her warm smile that could turn absolutely glacial when required. Emily opening the door in whatever expensive casual wear she'd deemed appropriate for a Tuesday morning, probably annoyed at being interrupted. 10:07. Another text from Susan. "Your mother just arrived. Emily looks like she might be sick. Robert is explaining the trust structure." I took a sip of coffee that had gone cold and waited. My phone rang at 10:12, Emily's name on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Hello, Emily." "What the hell did you do?" Her voice was shrill, panicked. "There are people here saying they own the house, saying we're living in Sophie's property illegally. What is this, Maggie? What kind of game are you playing?" I could hear voices in the background. My mother saying something sharp and angry. Robert's calm baritone responding. Susan's voice polite but firm. "I'm not playing a game," I said. "I told you when you moved in that I put the house in Sophie's name, that it's held in a trust for her future. The Harrisons are the trustees. It's all completely legal. You said we could stay here, I said you could stay temporarily while you got back on your feet. The trustees are there to ensure the property is being maintained properly and that Sophie's interests are protected. It's standard procedure for a trust of this size." "This is insane. We're family. You can't just—" Emily's voice broke off. I heard my mother in the background demanding to see identification, demanding to know who sent them, trying to take control of a situation that was already far beyond her ability to manage. "Emily," I said, still calm. "The Harrisons have full legal authority as trustees. I'd suggest you cooperate with their inspection. I'll be by later this week to discuss next steps." "Next steps? What next steps?" "Maggie, you can't do this. We have nowhere else to go." "Then you should probably start looking for somewhere," I said, and ended the call. My hands were steady as I set the phone down. A woman at the next table glanced over, probably having heard Emily's voice through the speaker. I smiled politely and returned to my laptop, though I couldn't have told you what was on the screen. 20 minutes later, Susan called. "Well?" she said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. "That was educational." "How bad?" "They've made extensive unauthorized alterations, painted over your custom wall colors with what I can only describe as aggressive teals and corals, removed or discarded most of the original furniture, including some pieces that appear to have been antique or custom refinished, installed new light fixtures without permits. Your mother tried to tell us they were just making it homey." Robert informed her that making unauthorized permanent alterations to a minor's property without trustee approval is a serious breach of the informal arrangement. I closed my eyes, seeing in my mind all the careful work I'd done on that house being casually destroyed because Emily thought taupe was boring. "We've documented everything," Susan continued. "Photographs, itemized list of changes, estimated cost of restoration. Robert is drafting the formal notice now. They have 30 days to either vacate the property or enter into a formal rental agreement with terms that would include rent at fair market value, security deposit, and financial responsibility for restoring the property to its original condition." How did they react? "Your mother is furious. She tried several approaches. First, she claimed there must be some mistake that you owned the house and they were living with your permission. When Robert showed her the trust documents, she shifted to saying that, of course, you'd approve any changes they made because you're family. When that didn't work, she tried to intimidate us, asking who we thought we were coming into her daughter's home making demands." "And Emily. kept trying to be charming, lots of, "Surely we can work something out," and "This is just a misunderstanding between family." She clearly thought if she could just explain properly, we'd realize we were being unreasonable and go away. Susan paused. "Your father didn't say much, just sat down heavily in the living room about halfway through and stared at the floor. I think he understands exactly what you've done. And Sophie stayed upstairs. We saw her watching from the landing at one point, but she didn't come down. Smart girl staying out of the line of fire." Robert's voice came through in the background, then Susan came back on. "Robert wants you to know he's leaving the formal notice with them now. 30 days starts today. We'll schedule another inspection in 2 weeks to ensure no further unauthorized changes are made." "Thank you," I said. "Both of you. I know this isn't pleasant." "Pleasant?" Susan laughed sharp and brief. "Maggie, I haven't enjoyed something this much in years. That woman tried to tell me I didn't understand how families work. Me, married 43 years with 6 grandchildren. The audacity. After we hung up, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour watching people come and go living their normal Tuesday lives. My phone buzzed periodically with texts. 1 from Emily, then 3 from my mother, increasingly frantic. I didn't read them, just watched the notifications pile up like evidence. For the first time, Emily understood something I'd learned at 20 years old. I didn't lose. I chose exactly who won. I didn't go home right away. After the coffee shop, I drove to the beach and walked Max along the shore for hours, watching the tide come in and trying to process what I'd set in motion. The Harrisons had done their job perfectly. Emily and my mother now understood that I hadn't surrendered, I'd outmaneuvered them. The 30-day notice was sitting on the kitchen counter of a house they'd thought was theirs,